we'll just go straight into the retreat.
I'm shocked presentation. Thank you, GRTC.
Benjamin, we moved there in the voice professor as well.
No, it all means.
That's GRTC. Joe Dillon, GRTC, External Government Affairs.
Jan Squid, Executive Assistant, GRTC. Adrian Torres, Chief Staff, GRTC.
Dexter Hurt, Director of IT, GRTC.
All right, public comments. Do we have some that you're gonna read from the two that we have?
Good morning to the board members. We have two public comments. One, I believe, is here in person. I'll go ahead and read the first public comment. It comes from Abby. I'm not a usual bus rider, but I would love it if we would support public bus stops. Personally, I live off of Robinson Street, the 5th District in Richmond. There are 3 bus stops within walking distance of my apartment, and all 3 of them don't have adequate coverage from severe weather. When it rains, folks waiting for the bus have waited on my porch in the past because that's the only place they can get out of the rain. So I hope that people across the region support covered bus stops going forward. We were hoping to speak in person.
Well, sorry to know there's this many people, so if y'all want to share, there's, I think, 6 sets there. You can get an idea of the building. Also, your board chair, Reverend Nelson, members of the GRTC board and GRTC staff, good morning. My name is Katie Thomas, and I'm a longtime Churchill resident, daily walker, and committed supporter of public transport and neighborhood confusion. Oh, I'm sorry, public transit. I also own a small property at the corner of Venable and Pete Streets in Union Hill, where bus stop 3703 is currently located. Because the current site creates ongoing challenges for both riders and the property, I'm requesting that the bus stop be relocated 1 block to the corner of Venable and Russell, where a wider sidewalk and building frontage provide a safer and more convenient location. I bought the building, it was abandoned and in poor condition. In the photos, after significant restoration, we're about 2 months to beginning our CFO. After significant restoration, I'm preparing to lease the property to a new small business that will contribute to our community. Unfortunately, limited space between the stop and the building leaves almost no space for riders to wait without blocking the sidewalk or entrance, which makes it difficult for pedestrians and future customers. The corner, in summary, the corner creates 3 main problems. Sidewalk space is too narrow, forcing riders to block entrances and pedestrian flow. There's no safe capacity for benches or trash receptacles without further crowding. Riders gather directly outside of the storefront windows, creating privacy and security concerns that threaten the business viability. Relocating the stop to Venable and Russell would be a true win-win. Riders coming from 25th and Venable, which is a major corridor in that area if you're familiar with the East End, would get more convenient and comfortable waiting area and an unobstructed sidewalk space for transit amenities the current stop cannot accommodate. At the same time, a thriving small business could welcome customers without conflict, strengthening the vitality of Union Hill. Neighbors I've spoken with agree this change reflects common sense and community spirit. I have shared this idea with my council representative, Cynthia Newville, and she supports my request to move bus stop 3703. Thank you for your attention and to this matter and for your ongoing commitment to public transit and community parks in Richmond.
I may have missed it, but is this a restaurant expected use?
We have it out, we have it listed right now, and so we're looking at a variety of people taking a look at it, a florist, a designer. It's not built out right now for a restaurant, like I need to put in. So if somebody comes along and really wants that, then we get the basic options going, but we essentially just finished the shell to be kind of generic, but nice, so that people could come in and say, what else do we need to do next?
It's beautiful what you've done.
Yes, it looks great.
So, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for your time. You guys, I have a copy of all this.
Do you have any other guests here that would like to speak?
Oh, okay, put that in the packet. Okay, all right, thank you.
Get that type of development. I know it does look good. We don't get it.
Good morning, members of the board. My name is Xavier Stokes. I'm an operator for GRTC and authorized disabled operator at GRTC under the Equal Employment Conditions Rights, also covered under ADA. I have been subjected to a hostile work environment, a toxic work environment, and retaliation. Events have occurred where I was out in the field and events were continuously reported. There was nothing done by upper management and staff here in the building while I was out there basically taking a beat down. My rights, my civil rights as a disabled employee under ADA was violated. And with that being said, I was completely ignored. And when this was reported by a passenger, I was thrown out like trash. This was not fair. It was done in my absence. It was done in the union's absence, who also is here to represent and protect me as a employee here at GRTC. The severity of this, I am bringing before the board for possible board review for the violation for this were very great. The point that it was just unbelievable. As an employee here, I am otherwise disabled, but my performance with my tenure here at GRTC of 8 years is not in question. Also, my experience of 15 years, my performance is not in question. However, my support from staff here at GRTC headquarters is in question. Well, again, I was treated unfairly, ignored, and thrown out like trash. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Do we have any other speakers?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry about that.
You all right?
My name is Yolanda Stokes. And again, that's how I represent the Ward 6 area of Hopewell, but not the members of the Hopewell City Council. What brings me here is twofold. This is probably my second rodeo with you that I'm asking for privilege, political privilege. Mr. Xavier Stokes lives in my ward. So any complaint he has, or any constituent of Ward 6 and 2 comes to me, so I end up having to advocate for it. My lifelong work has been equal employment opportunity. I sat under the Governor Allen administration as the investigator for the United States Department of Equal Employment Opportunity. Also, I did fair housing and equal opportunity for the city of Petersburg, and decided a lot of training. As a paralegal, I worked under the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, which was Cassandra back then in Petersburg, and I'm well trained. I was disappointed when I saw what had happened in Xavier. Virginia and most states, we hire and we fire at will, but we do not discriminate. What Xavier was explaining is he has an active FMLA under you that protects him with his disability. When he requested longer before you take any adverse action against an employee, you would listen to that particular employee's request for an accommodation. And that's what he's requesting from his board, is a reasonable accommodation to waive the rules and regulations under the Americans with Disabilities Act to allow him a fair opportunity to present his complaint that he filed prior to any adverse action. Former supervisor Sean Modesti already filed a complaint against the issues, not getting into the issues, but a complaint had been filed to remove a person off of a bus that would cause this type of problem. To ignore an ADA is unfounded. And because these persons have done this before, it puts them in the line of retaliation. All right. So go back, waive the rules on the ADA, and review what actually happened, not necessarily the merits, but what happened. Did you give him proper due process? Nobody's trying to make money. Nobody's trying to get into a lawsuit. This gentleman's disability depends on his job. And his disability, he could draw a disability check, but we found this niche. And he's been driving the bus. But he's driven over 8 years, and I will promise you, within 6 years of employment, he's fought harassment from 3 staff people, the CEO, the Director of Human Resources, and now your head of supervision. They got an award. Each of them have violated grading. And I'm not saying that and I may have violated. I'm telling you as a professional, it's violated. You cannot ignore. And he's met all the requirements. And he's covered under your FMLA program, and you deny him the right, then that person should not be CEO of a company that has a logo that says, we adhere to the rules and regulations of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and particularly disabled persons. All right, you can't ignore that. And it doesn't stop because you decide to terminate. And I've trained many employees, including Honeywell, because you fired him. You still obligated under ADA to follow through. And in all fairness to this board, And as a public figure myself, and of course, you've seen all over the news what has happened in Hopewell. And I'm probably the one counselor that stood out, because I will not discriminate against anybody for any reason. Because you don't know at what point you may be in that place. So, Ms. Cheryl, you owe him an audience, all right? And you owe him the right under ADA to hear his views. You knew it was coming. And we reached out to you to talk to you, and you have returned no phone calls and no emails. That does not negate your responsibility. And more importantly, your responsibility to this board. Because for us to come here and bring this board to the table, then you have failed this board. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other speakers?
Hello, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and I'm a resident and a member of the New Virginia majority. I want to start out with highlighting a few Richmond attractions that I'm unable to reach with the current bus route. Currently, I'm unable to go to Pony Pasture, Lewis Ginter Botanical Gardens on the bus without additional less than safe walking after the closest stop. I would love to see both of these amazing nature locations more accessible via GRTC for people like myself who depend on the bus for getting around the region. And also at the stops, there could be a heating and cooling systems. And also at the stops, it could be more aesthetically pleasing with local artists. Second, I want to highlight a few items that will be discussed in the board retreat meeting and my hopes for the conversation. As a part of the NVM, I heard many bus riders share their concerns about fares returning for GRTC. I myself would be really impacted by this happening too. When fare free started in 2020, we all knew the trip grant funding would only be there for 4 years. From the public perspective, now it feels like GRTC is scrambling to find the funds when we should have been planning and saving for this necessary line item on the budget. And some suggestions we could explore is congestive pricing taxes, federal grants, more advertisements, asking schools like U of R, Virginia Union, CarMax, Union Energy, and also looking at a premium bus service like on a subscription plan. I strongly encourage the counties to consider how much economic development is coming into your area and carry more of your weight when the GRTC budget to help pay for fare free. Borders are imaginary lines on a map, and as a bus rider, the bus doesn't stop and change services when we enter the county. And yet the city of Richmond is contributing double the amount of Henrico at 9.3 million and 4.5 million respectively. Chesterfield, while being a partial owner, is contributing less than at 2.5 million. I remind everyone that the fare free is 6.8 million. Many of us work and live in several localities, cook our food in one locality and the grocery store is another. We need to have a strong investment from the entire region to make the bus system work efficiently, effectively for a strong regional economy where residents are able to live, work, and spend more money to boost their communities and upward mobility. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good morning, y'all. Appreciate y'all giving us the opportunity for public comment. I have 3 quick things. Having trouble getting my words out. 3 quick things. Slow coming out, hard to say. Anyway, first, I'd like to support everything that Ben said. I stand in solidarity with him. As an organizer of New Virginia Majority, particularly, we need better access to the parks, and they need better access to grocery stores and food markets in particular. Also, one thing quick to note before y'all approve last minute, while as a Black man, I am a minority of Virginia, I am with New Virginia Majority, so please make sure that is reflected on the agenda. Right now it says Rashid Parker, Virginia Minority. Please make sure it says New Virginia Majority, as it says in my shirt. Last thing, just a suggestion for these meetings, while folks are attending online, see this small little square here. Sometimes it's hard to see who exactly is speaking. So we suggest when speaking, or before you speak, or you just notify and say who you are, so we are aware when we're have folks attending virtually. That's all I got. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Can't do approval minutes, can't do consent, can't do action items. I guess we're gonna move on to the board retreat.
Yes, you are.
All right. The city made an official change in their representation that's been submitted to the board?
No, not yet. That should come out.
Okay. I was just trying to see if there was a way we could,
Yes.
make it work so we had a quorum, but.
Pay for effort, man.
Does the board have to take an action on changing people, or is that locality's ability to do without the board having to weigh in?
Recommends there are three. I mean, the jurisdictions recommend there are three, and then in October, the shareholders meeting is when they're
The
voting.
shareholders have to vote on it, which is Richmond and Chesterfield. Okay, all right. All right. Well, I guess I've exhausted every avenue.
Yeah, it ain't happening today.
No, I tried.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Welcome to our September 2025 board retreat. We are happy to have each of you here. So we have FY 26 budget done in the books, and we are continuing to look at that each month. But now it's time to plan for FY 27. And that's part of the reason why we're having this retreat. We want this to be the kickoff for our budget. Because you all remember last year, we were all the way until June before we voted on the budget, which used to take place in July. So we want to avoid that happening this year, so we are starting early. And we're starting with this budget, with this board retreat, because we want to get direction from the board before we implement it. And as you can see from the screen, we are, for September, we've been busy. We've been doing grant project lists, submission to CMAQ, and we're working on our FY 27 miles and hours projections. In October, each of the departments will have their initial budget needs to us. And our goal is to have a draft budget request to each of the jurisdictions in November, which is early, and we know that a lot of the jurisdictions are working on their budgets around that time as well. So our grant applications, the initial submission will be in December. And for January, we plan to have a reviewed draft budget with the board. February, we'll submit our grants. March, we'll update the board on the grant, on the draft, and then the final budget for May. So this meeting today is pretty important for us to meet some of our goals in order to get the jurisdictions our budget request in November. So before we get into the nitty gritty of all the budgets and projections, we want to do a year in review so that we can look at some of the things that we've accomplished in FY 25. It's coming.
have to be the chair because I'm the vice chair and I'm talking to the chair, but yeah.
We were busy. We accomplished a lot. This just highlights some of the things that you saw in the video, except the first one, the ridership. Hitting over 12 million riders in one fiscal year is a record for us. So we wanted to highlight that part for you all to remind you. But also some of that ridership, of course, is because of the route expansions. So that's expanding the Route 1 to Virginia Center Commons, the frequency on the Route 7A, 7B, the Route 19 expansion to Shelter and Arms, which is in Goochland County. And now we're talking about the Western and North-South expansion projects, and we are in the process of completing the NEPA study. And then, of course, our link zones. Just to remind you all, we have 5 pilot zones. It's Ashland, Azalea, Howerton, Cloverdale, and Sandston. And they are all doing very well, we're happy to say. Some other things, of course, our beautiful DTS and the MOU that we have to the city that we're thankful for. All of our ETI efforts, which we are continuing to update, and we update the development committee each month on any that we've added. So far we've improved 24 bus stops. As you saw from the video, our PSAs and PSOs, and each month we come to you with the stats of how they're assisting customers and helping with that. Our articulated buses that arrived and are now in service. The pulse station modifications because of the articulated buses. We have electric vehicles that's we utilize in our link microtransit service, and we have charging stations now on site. Demolishing the 325 East Belt. For those of you that don't know, that's the property adjacent to us where the cars are currently being parked. Down at our DTS, it's important to note that we added restrooms for our bus operators. We have a new employee gym to help with employees' health and our health insurance to keep them healthy. We updated all of our badges for all of our employees. And then we have a connectors outreach group that we launched in FY25 as well. Some of the other communications and recognitions that we currently have a MEET program, which is a mentor program. And the purpose of that program is to have, pair up a veteran driver with a new operator that's fresh out of training in hopes of helping them along the way and giving them advice and lessons so that we can retain them. So far it's working. We have our first ceremony this Thursday. I think it is to recognize those operators and the success of that program. You saw from the video that we received some awards from VTA, Virginia Transit Association, and we won a marketing award for a large agency for our 1A advertising program that we did. Also for our exceptional safety award for our de-escalation program that we have in place. And one of our bus operators who told you all about early on, Ramon Harris, he received the Unsung Hero Award, and he was the one that stopped a lady from being attacked. He stopped the bus and assisted her, and he received the Unsung Hero Award for that. We've completed our first round of engagements for both the Western and the North-South expansion projects. Our advertising program restarted, and that's going really well. We shared with you all last month our new website with the public-facing key performance dashboards and our ETI status tracking page. Hopefully some of you went to the website and tried to play around with that a little bit to see what ETIs were put in your area. And then, of course, we participated in the Christmas parade, which was a lot of fun. I'm going to turn it over now to Adrian, who's also going to work with Scudder on the next portion of it.
Good morning. Scudder and I are going to tag team this. We are going to first go through some FY25 performance. So sharing you guys with all of the modes, how the routes have done. But before we get into that, Scudder is actually going to take a step back and go over our system in general, how it currently is designed, as well as talk about coverage versus ridership, which was a big thing when we did our network redesign and what our network looks like it does today. And we may be taking a look at that as we do these BRTs, looking at this density has changed, population has changed, areas have changed. So looking at how the routes will connect to the future BRTs might also be in our future. So then I'm gonna not kick it. Can you actually just show, I want to go just to see our system altogether.
But this is a tool we've built previously that helps you visualize what's happening in your existing network so that you can see, for example, you can explore your current fixed route service network color coded by the frequency of service, which I'll talk more about as we go through today, why frequency matters so much. Frequency, how soon a bus shows up. Red means every 15 minutes, which means the bus is basically always coming soon. You don't have a long wait, you can get where you're going pretty quickly. Blue means service every 30 minutes, most of the day. Goes down in the evening sometimes. Green means service every 60 minutes. And we also have microtransit zones here that we can layer on so you can see where those services are in your network and across the region. There's a wide range of data we can add into this map so you can see more, for example, the density of people, the density of jobs, the density of poverty, other factors that are significantly relevant to the potential ridership, to the number of people you're serving, and so on. But also we can layer in and look at, what is the ridership pattern? Looking at the ridership for every stop across your system. And you can see you have significant ridership. It's a little bit hard to see washed out, but if I zoom in here, you can start to see more clearly the patterns of ridership by stop across each line, and we can explore more details. So this is something we can explore as if you have questions, if we're going into individual routes as we talk more about performance today, or you can explore on your own at any time using the link from this presentation later today, later this week, as you want. But there's a wealth of information here to just help you kind of see what's happening in your system. Where is service today? Where is it in relationship to people, activity centers, and then what is ridership looking like across your network? So this is one tool that we're using to help understand, and there's little bits of information you can get. You click on a stop, you can actually see the actual number of boardings per day on average. Let's see, that come up. We can click on individual microtransit zones. You can see what is the productivity, which I'll talk about a little bit. Productivity is number of people who ride for every hour of service you're providing. That's relevant both to any kind of service you're running. So there's a wealth of information here that we can explore at any time. And I think the next bit we're going to talk about is some information on recent ridership surveys.
Yes. Yes.
We can swap back to the presentation.
You said we'll have an opportunity to go over some of this data today.
Before you do that. Yes, you'll have an opportunity. He's gonna go back into it in more detail, but I want to zoom out just a little bit to kind of, so you mentioned the red, blue, and green. Red being more frequent, but we also want to say that those are usually in more urban and dense areas. So it was designed for that. So that's usually 15-minute frequency. The blue being 30 minutes are on more of our arterial corridors. So still not as high density as the red, but still there's a lot of activity centers along the blue corridors. That's why it's designed. And the green we describe more as like our lifeline routes. So they will never be as productive as the blue or the red. That's intentional because people still live there and may not ever be dense, but they need to be able to get to the rest of the system for access. The zones, those are microtransit zones, and this is as it was in the spring, since we're talking about FY25. We have made some tweaks in the summer. And these zones were designed now as basically first mile, last mile service. So you'll see like in Ashland, you can connect to the Route 1, Sandstone connects to a lot of stuff. The route over in the one in Cloverdale route connects to Fix Route as well as the 82X. And then the change we made for Powhatan as it actually now connects to Chesterfield over here as first mile, last mile. There's also two purposes for microtransit. They were either a route replacement. We used to have a line that you guys know in Henrico that was 93. It was replaced by Azalea, or as first mile, last mile / rural service. Just want to put there as we talked about the productivity later. There was some questions about kind of profiles of this user system, so wanted to bring back up some of our demographics. Oh, that's right. So household income, we have it broken down by mode, so you guys can kind of see the shift of household income based on the type of service. So we have our local routes here, and as we know that primarily a lot of transit dependent, low income riders utilize our local system. The change of profile shifts a little bit with our Pulse. However, the Pulse has a lot more riders as individual routes compared to the local system. So income levels changed. Paratransit. This is our service that is complementary to our local route that is required within 3/4 of a mile of our fixed route for those who qualify. And then our link service, which are microtransit service. So there's a lot of similar trends across the various modes in terms of income. Race, ethnicity, same thing, broken down by the modes of service. So you'll see the local service where we have around 70% as African American or Black. The next big one being 20% as Caucasian or white. The Pulse, similar to income, that's a little bit different profile with 29% African American, and then 44% as Caucasian white, and then 11% as Hispanic or Latino. Express routes, our commuter service that has limited stops is 75% African American or Black, then 11% Caucasian or white. Paratransit, 64% African American or Black, and then 25%. And then Link is very similar to the paratransit with the 64% and the 25%. Age by mode, primary for local and pulse, between 25 and 34. Others coming up right behind. For air transit, still wanted to question this one because it's based on the criteria for the service, but at 18 to 49 was the highest with a very, very wide range. Which I guess makes sense why it's the highest because it's a very wide range. And then this is our link service, which also a very wide range. These were separate surveys for these than the local Pulse Express were done in 2023.
Adrian, I hate to ask a question in the middle of this, but the local impulse, is there any, do we do any data collection on how much of that age is represented by VCU students?
We have a question on the survey that asks if you're a student. It does not say specifically VCU, which you can infer because you also connect it to where they are taking the survey. We couldn't. Yes, this is meant to be interactive. So if there are questions, please ask them and we'll also pull questions.
Paratransit, that's usually one of the more expensive services. How do we fund that here?
Yes, it is one of the more expensive services, and we've actually seen an increase in use because it's free. That is funded some of it through our, we can use some of our federal for the ADA. We also have the state pays for a portion of that with third party operate, and the rest comes from kind of our general service through the jurisdictions as well as through the CPA.
I think that gets me to my final question on this with the federal cuts, many of them coming in transportation. Have you seen any reduction in funds that are normally allocated to that service? Has there been any adjustment, especially an adjustment down from our federal and state partners?
We have not experienced it yet, no.
Adrian, a small point, but if, I know you said it's free, it's fare free. Everything has a big cost to it. So
Sure.
just want to make sure that people know there is a significant value to it, even though it's fare free.
Cost with the individual, it's zero. So the last one I believe is gender and education. So gender by mode, so it's just a breakdown between female, male, and non-binary. And the last one being education by mode. We have the less than high school and GED being the highest. We have some college, and we'll see with the express routes, we have a lot more that have bachelor's or undergraduate degree in terms of percent. Association technical school degree. The last one, graduate or professional degree. It's pretty high for their schools. All right, I'm going to get this back over to Scott.
Will we receive those slides?
Yeah, you will receive a copy of these. So I wanted to spend a little time talking about how is the existing network performing, going a little more into some details about your existing, particularly fixed route network, and some of the performance. This is just a static version of that same sort of map, color coded again by the frequency of service. Today, you run about 575,000 annual service hours, meaning 575,000 hours of buses running on the street serving customers per year in fixed route. About 24,000 revenue hours or service hours per year for microtransit services in those zones that you've added in the last few years. Fixed routes are serving 5 jurisdictions in the region, but primarily the city of Richmond and Chesterfield, just a little bit of service into Richmond and the 5X, touching Petersburg a few trips a day. I like to help people think about what is it you're trying to do with your transit service. And is it achieving goals you want by talking about analogies to other services that you all as government representatives help provide. So it's helpful to kind of analogize what is the primary purpose of your fire department? Well, in part, it's building confidence in cities as a place to live by providing all kinds of safety services. RideFinders also provide a lot of community programming. They volunteer, they help raise funds for lots of good causes. They do all kinds of community outreach activities. They sometimes provide dramatic content for TV or TikTok or whatever social media outlets people are posting to. They make children very happy when they drive by with their sirens. But of course, fire and building safety is their core primary activity that you're funding. But there are funds going to these various other things that fire departments are trying to do. And so in transit, what we often want to think about and talk about is, hey, where can I be soon? Because particularly when you're thinking about fixed route and the general public facing product, paratransit, I'm going to set off to the side for a minute. People are trying to get to destinations, trying to get to the grocery store, trying to get to work, and they're trying to get there in a reasonable amount of time. And this little bubble icon of red, orange, yellow, and green here is showing you how far you can get. And this is actually long ago in 2016, how far you can get in 15, 30, 45, or 60 minutes. And this is a useful way to think about what is the value transit is providing in terms of where can you get to in a reasonable amount of time. And you can think of this as like the wall around your life. If you can't get to enough reasonable destination in a reasonable amount of time, transit's not going to be a viable option for you, realistically. And even if you don't have a car and a driver's license, you will probably try to find alternatives. You'll bike, you'll get a ride from a friend, or you may try to eventually get a vehicle, even if it's an old and challenging vehicle and expensive vehicle. So what if we're trying to grow these blobs of access, grow these, how can we provide more access to opportunity? How can we provide people more places to go? And not just that area. That area matters, but it's what's inside that area. What places can you actually reach? So a valuable way of thinking about this is what percentage of a region or city's jobs, churches, parks, educational destinations, et cetera, are within 30 or 45 or 60 minutes of lots of different, of any individual region. How can we maximize that? How can we really improve that? And there's a pretty simplistic, straightforward recipe to how you can maximize that for the people on average in the region. And that's a frequent, high frequency all day network. So you have a short wait, because a significant part of what makes those blobs small most of the time is if you have low frequency and you have long waits. Long waits when you want to ride the bus, long waits when you want to transfer between routes. And yes, you may, with your wonderful apps, be able to time when you catch the bus. But if your bus gets to your job at 7:05 a.m. or 8:05 a.m. because it's an hourly route and you have to clock in at 8 a.m., you're going to get on the bus that gets you there at 7:05 a.m. and you have 55 minutes of your day kind of wasted. So frequency in a connected network with reasonable speed and reliability, sufficient capacity, and this is the really challenging part where we start thinking about how do we make that useful to as many people and destinations as possible. You're going to put those things where you have the most density of activity and is reasonably walkable and reasonably linear, so the buses can be relatively fast. That's the basic recipe. So frequency is a thing that's often most overlooked, but it really has a critical cubed value. You can go when you want to, you can walk, if you're in every 15-minute bus route, you can walk out the door, you know a bus is probably coming soon. And it makes connections vastly easier. If you're connecting between two 15-minute routes, you have a reasonable high likelihood that when you get off one bus to get on the next one's coming reasonably soon. Trying to transfer randomly between two 60-minute routes is a high probability you're going to wait an average of 30 minutes versus an average of 7.5 minutes for a route that comes every 15 minutes. And it's automatically a backstop for liability. If you live on an hourly route and the bus happens to break down on your route, you're waiting for someone here to send out a new driver and a new bus. Don't know how long that will take. If you're on every 15-minute route, bus breaks down, there's another one coming soon on that same. And it's a key to affordability. The frequency is kind of hard to explain. It's not something that's very obvious to folks who don't use transit. The basic factors you may experience in your daily life are you're in an old building and you're waiting for an elevator. That's just taking a long time. You may wait 2 minutes. It may feel like an eternity. Imagine that waiting for an hourly bus. Traffic signals, freight trains that delay you for 5 or 10 minutes. Think about waiting for half an hour. Another good analogy to think about is imagine there's a gate at the end of your driveway that only opens once an hour. It opens at 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. If you have to leave for work by 7, you better be in your car with your coffee ready to go at 6:55 and hope the bus operator or gate operator in this instance didn't open the gate early. That's kind of the experience for a driver. The other factor relating back to thinking about ridership is that we know frequency is related to productivity. I mentioned productivity before and places where you have high productivity and low productivity. Productivity is basically how many people are riding a vehicle for every hour you're running a vehicle on the street. It costs you today about $130 for every hour you're running a bus on the street. So obviously, the more people who are riding that bus, you are effectively getting more bang for the dollar you're spending. If your goal is ridership. If we look at the measure of productivity on the vertical axis, so 0, 10, 20, 30 boardings an hour going up compared to the frequency of service in transit agencies across North America. As you go to the farther to the right, you have lower frequency, so you have 60 minutes there. That part, 60-minute routes, 30-minute routes, 15-minute routes, 10-minute routes. There's a pretty clear relationship. More frequent services tend to be more productive because they're just vastly more useful, but also because transit agencies logically put them in the places where you have more people, more destinations relative to other services. This is a really valuable and important relationship because it helps us understand that sometimes you are actually underserving some corridors in your region. If you only have enough resources to put down a 60-minute route in a place that is relatively dense, you may actually be able to get more ridership if you could afford to put more service out there and get more productivity in the right kinds of corridors and the right kinds of places. So what are those places that tend to succeed on ridership terms? Well, dense places. Pretty straightforward geometric issue. You're spending 2 buses on the corridor on the bottom here, which has half as many people around every bus stop as the one on the top. You're spending the same number of buses on each. You have twice as many potential customers. Pure geometry, not thinking about anybody's demographics. Walkability. If you have 2 stops with the same exact number of people within a quarter mile of that stop by flying distance, but you have completely different streets networks. And in the upper example, you have a pretty nice gridded street network like you find in downtown Richmond or the Fan or a lot of the north side of Richmond. Most of that circle, you can actually walk in 5 minutes to get to the bus stop. If you have the same number of people in that flying distance circle, but with a street network, lots of cul-de-sacs, with lots of disconnected streets, and quite commonly on a lot of commercial corridors in most suburban areas, you have a narrow band of commercial completely disconnected from residential behind it, so there's no actual walking paths. You might only be able to reach half the area and thus half the people. So even if there's the same exact number of jobs, the same exact number of people inside those circles, you're going to get vastly less ridership in the lower example. The other significant challenge you have to think about in transit is in transit, people are walking to the stop. People need to cross the street at some point in order to reach the stop, either getting to their destination or coming back from their destination. And if you can't cross the street, but every half a mile or mile, which is common on a lot of wider, faster corridors in the region, then that makes a lot of destinations unreachable for transit riders. Another significant one is linearity. And this really comes down to how long does it take you to get buses down a corridor. If you have a corridor where all of your major destinations are lined up within walking distance of the major road that your bus is running on, you can serve that corridor with fewer buses because your buses can go faster in the same frequency. If all of your destinations are behind a half a mile of parking that you actually have to run the bus off the main road and into that parking, or on a cul-de-sac of an office park that's a mile off the road, or a big hill that you have to go off the road, you're going to have to spend another bus or 2 or 3 to provide the same frequency on that corridor. So being able to run in straight lines, and then proximity. If you have significant distance gaps without much stuff in between, it takes you longer. If you're trying to run the same frequency, it means you need to spend more buses for the same number of riders, and thus you get fewer riders relative to cost. So this is an example here of the challenge is the airport. The BRT ends out at Rockets Landing, you have Fulton Hill, and then you have not a lot in between. If you wanted to extend the BRT to the airport, that's a logical end destination, but there's just not a lot in between. So you wouldn't get a lot of ridership in that kind of low density area in between. So all of this is really just to lay the foundation of understanding, like in firefighting, like in a lot of other public services, there's a range of goals that transit is trying to achieve. And everything I just described is what you would do if your primary goal was to get as many people riding transit per dollar spent. And that may not be your goal. So the abstract example of this challenge is if this is the fictional city that you all are running transit in, and these gray lines are all the streets you can run buses on, and these dots are all the people and jobs that you're trying to serve or potentially serve, you've got 18 buses. How should you allocate your resources? If you all, as the board, were to tell me, okay, we really believe that maximizing the number of people riding per dollar we spend is the most important. Maximizing ridership means maximizing frequency in the densest places. So I would say you would have 2 routes, putting 9 buses on each of those routes. You have a bus coming every 10 minutes on those 2 main corridors that serve about 70% of the people in your city. And you would be saying, I'm thinking like a business. I'm thinking like maximizing the bang for buck here. And I'm going to say, measure your success and productivity, ridership relative to cost. However, you may come back to me because Mrs. Smith in the south corner of the city may say, well, this isn't fair. I pay in taxes to help run this service, but I don't have any service. I can't reach transit. And if you were all to come back and say, okay, maybe this is not the right thing to do. Maybe we need to make sure everyone has something. I'd say, well, that's a perfectly reasonable choice. That is a different goal to maximize. That goal to maximize is coverage, some service for everyone. But with only 18 buses, and now we're having to serve a lot more streets, a lot more routes, we might only have 2 buses on each route. And now you may only have bus coming once an hour on all these routes. But Mrs. Smith and everyone in all of these different neighborhoods, they have something within walking distance of everybody. And if that is your priority, I would say, okay, measure your success on the percentage of people you're actually serving, and don't focus that much on the productivity, because you will have lower productivity, because it will take a lot longer for people to get places with the longer waits for the bus, longer transfer times, and so on. So this is an eternal dilemma in transit of how you balance these goals. How much do you emphasize each? Almost no transit system I've worked with maximizes fully one or the other. And as you maximize ridership or frequency and usefulness, you're going to focus where the highest potential for ridership is, which is the densest corridors, the most walkable corridors. The things that tend to come along with doing so means generally you're going to maximize average job access across the overall population, even though you're actually serving fewer total people. But the people you do serve, you're serving very well. That tends to get more people riding, which gets you the environmental benefits of transit, because all of that comes from people riding transit, not just transit existing. You will get congestion benefits from that, because fewer people using cars reduces congestion, et cetera. On the other side of the spectrum, focusing more on coverage obviously gets you that goal of lifeline access for as many people as possible. It meets goals of political equity, of balancing the investment across different districts, across different jurisdictions. And it provides services to hard to serve areas that will get low ridership and may have particularly high relative need, meaning lower density communities that may be impoverished and feel excluded otherwise. Those are things that tend to come with emphasizing coverage goals. There we go. So it can be helpful to choose a point on the spectrum. When we worked through this process in 2016, 2017 with the city of Richmond redesigning their network, which is kind of the core structure of the regional network today, the city at the time set a goal of about 70-30 for its network. Is that still the right balance today for the whole network? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's been quite a long time. You know, today, I would estimate just roughly that you're at about a 70-30 split today. The emphasis of the service hours you put on high ridership places versus the services that are focused on coverage goals. As I'll come back to in a moment as I talk about productivity, all of those microtransit zones, I would say, are coverage oriented. That's just the reality of almost all microtransit. It's a coverage oriented focus. I won't go back to the interactive tool, but I do want to talk a little bit about some trends and then some data. So if we look at trends since 2018 across your network for fixed route in particular, you have 3.4 million more annual boardings for riders today than you did in 2018. There was a dip there in 2021 during kind of the depths of COVID, but you had a 47% increase overall in ridership. Some of that is attributable to you've expanded service and improved service in that time. There's about 108,000 more service hours on the street running today than there was in 2018. That's a 25% increase. So with more service, you would expect to get more riders to some extent, but also you've gone zero fare. You've made investments in improved service, extending the 19, increasing the frequency recently, increasing the frequency of the 7AB, improvements into Route 1, extending it into Commons, extending the Route 1A, extending the Route 3B further south to Chesterfield, extending the Route 79, quite a few significant expansions, extensions, improvements in frequency that would obviously fall into this. So ridership has gone up almost 50%. Service has gone up about 25%. So your productivity, riders relative to service hours, is up about 17% since 2018. It actually peaked in 2019 at about 22.5 boardings per service hour. Went down with some of the loss of ridership during COVID, but has come back up close to that peak level that you saw in 2019.
Why is 2018 used as the baseline year?
That was, I'd say, the starting point for before 2018. 2018 is when the network was completely changed. So the network of services that's there today really started in 2018, and the BRT opened in 2018. So that's the first year that you have the impact of all of that. And so we're sort of comparing back to then to kind of see the picture from that big change through COVID to today. Before 2018, the network was just a completely different structure.
I guess what I'm curious about, is there a difference in the data, which I'm sure you may not be able to point out now, if we look at that year when you're fully ramped up in 2019 as compared to today, where we're in a post-COVID environment, where just curious if that would be a more apples to apples comparison of
starting in 2019?
Saying that 2019 to a 2024, 2025 activity, what the difference would be.
Well, I mean, you can imagine that if we were just to cut off these charts at 2019, the major difference in outcomes would just be that productivity was highest in 2018, in large part because service levels didn't really start increasing until 2020. You started to see service levels going up starting in 2020 with some of the new investments. Henrico made new investments starting in 2020 with extensions and improvements of 19, 18, 79, and so on. And those are...
I'd be curious to see 2019 versus now, that cutoff.
Okay.
I mean, you can't do it today and shouldn't try, but I'd be interested in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the other side of this is I've been talking about just the comparison of ridership to service hours. What's the other thing to look at is kind of under the hood, what's happening with actual cost of service. And there has been a substantial increase in cost over that time period. But if we look at the overall cost of service, overall cost of service has actually been up by 72% since 2018. And you've increased service levels by 25%, which is going to naturally increase your total dollar cost. There's been a substantial underlying increase in the baseline cost of how much it costs to run your service in general. So if you hadn't increased service at all, we would have seen a substantial cost increase anyway, because per hour of service costs have gone up about 37% in that same time period. So in 2018, it was about just under $100 per service hour. So every hour of running a bus on the street costs at that time about $100. Today, you're looking at, it's about $133 for every hour of service. Many of you who were on the board, I think a couple of years ago, when your last big collective bargaining agreement was approved, will recall the significant wage increases, which were effectively necessary to help address your labor shortage and driver shortage. So a lot of this is mostly driven by that challenge, the challenge of increasing labor costs and particularly in the post-COVID period, with operators, supervisors, but across really all staff. That's the biggest driver.
Has labor productivity increased and improved as well?
Well, your recruitment and retention rates have drastically improved. Yes, I don't know. I don't have the numbers at my fingertips, but the number of shortages you have in operators is vastly down since that. Yes.
It took us a long time to drivers to get over, like we were stuck there forever. And where we at now?
321.
321. It was 150. No, it was just 250. It was 250. I'm sorry. So it went from 250 to 321. So 250 is where we were stuck for a long time.
Oh, no, listen, I'm in support of it. I just know when we usually highlight that the cost of labor is high and is increasing our labor costs, that's one part of the story. But by increasing those labor costs and making those investments in people, you also get to stabilize your workforce, which in turn improves service, which I'd imagine has occurred here.
Yeah, there was a significant period there from 21.
We couldn't even maintain service at 250, and now we've expanded since.
Yeah, so there was a significant period there for probably 2 years with that labor shortage where you had far more missed trips, so far less reliability in the service that was on the street, which was probably had some impact on suppressing ridership for a period of time. And now you've really got beyond that. So it's not as obvious in the numbers from the ridership side, but it's certainly obvious in some of the other metrics you're seeing on a monthly basis in terms of far fewer missed trips there. So another way of looking at ridership relative to cost is talk about cost per boarding, which is basically taking that productivity metric I talked about and then taking the dollar cost per hour and dividing it by the productivity. So in this case, you see the impact of the rising cost leading to an increased cost per boarding, but suppressed somewhat by the fact that you've had an increase in productivity and an increase in ridership. So in the 2018-2019 period, you were a little above $5 per boarding, i.e. per trip in effect, for every person who boarded. The cost per boarding peaked in 2021 because ridership was down, productivity was down, and costs were going up. But with costs moderating a little bit and then ridership increasing significantly, you see cost per boarding as flattened out a little bit at just above $6 per boarding.
This is fixed only now.
This is fixed only. Yeah, we're going to come back to some of the other modes in just a minute. Actually, Adrian's going to tell you a little more about some of the numbers on the paratransit side, since that's not my specialty.
I do want to highlight that we, as far as productivity, in terms of operators, that we also reduce service. So if we had only 225 operators, we would only end up having service that could accommodate maybe like 275 operators to get to run. The opposite, 225, we would have done 200, so we had an extra board that could complement. So we didn't really see an impact in terms of what was on the street. We did have missed trips, but not as much as you would see if we had planned. And then one other thing, Henrico, you saw our 2018 and 2019 costs. We designed the network and the pulse to be cost neutral. So you wouldn't really see that much of a change in terms of cost between 2 years. However, Henrico added weekend service. They expanded their 19 out. Henrico did not have weekend or service after 74. So there was an increase of about, I think it was like $2 or $3 million that Henrico invested in service in that particular year. All right, so switching from fixed route to paratransit. So this is our paratransit map. So the way it is designed, everything that's in kind of the darker transparent purple is our care network. So that's the required amount that's within the 3/4 mile all over our fixed route system. As we've expanded to Chesterfield, is expanded as we've expanded to Virginia Center Commons. It's also expanded as well as the 1A to Chesterfield as well. And then we have what is the lighter transparent purple, which is that's the Care Plus. So Henrico County has always operated, basically the whole county has offered paratransit service. That is not something that is federally required, but it is a service we provide internally through our third party with We Drive You. So this is the ridership breakdown. So care ridership, 213 for the required amount, about 32,000 for the Care Plus. And then Care on Demand, which is we have a contract with third party USERV to operate an on-demand version. And these down here give the descriptors that there's a base of $7 minimum that the rider pays for a minimum of 6 miles. Now, if it's anything beyond 6 miles, they pay, I think, $1.15 for each additional mile. And that is on them. We have seen this continue to grow as people are willing to pay for this service. As commented earlier, transit is very expensive. And I said this is going to be a little bit more interactive. So in terms of equity, we have to have fares match our fixed route service for care. So this has to match. If we're 0 in fixed route, that has to match. We want to show that the Care Plus, just like this having a cost, does not have to be 0 fare. So something to think about if that is considered a premium service. Also that we have seen, so if you're a rider, you hypothetically could get on in Chesterfield all the way down here, and you could ride all the way by yourself up to Hanover. And that is very, very far and not something that would have been possible pre all the network changes and very expensive. We used to have what was zone based. So if you were to get on here and go here, here, there, once you got out of the care zone, you would then have to pay a premium, about $3 additional, to be able to operate the service. So paratransit costs have increased. Before pandemic, they were roughly 7 million. We're looking at about 10 million. We have challenged ourselves to look for some inefficiencies to bring that down to 9. But we didn't want to show that if this was to be some level of funding of what it costs, not funding of cost in terms of on the rider of what it was before, that this on its own is about 1.3 million for cost. So we can talk about it at the end, but that this is considered a premium service in terms of the greater care that Chesterfield charged $6, which is similar to this as far as.
Actually, so real quick.
Sure.
So the care, if someone is getting on care, they can travel into the Care Plus zone?
Yes. Today, like I had to work hard to get these separated to see the difference, because right now we just lump them together. They may know it by destination, like the actual address that you've left this zone and now entered this zone, which is how it got this. But the person scheduling does not distinguish between the two.
And FTA requires that people can go from care into the Care Plus zone.
This is not recognized, like we can capture the ridership, but as far as requirement, This is just
Yeah.
like you guys have.
I know
access to.
that Care Plus
Yeah.
is not FTA required.
Yeah.
But I meant the trip. So if someone is getting in on care,
That's just something that we have decided as far as policy wise, that we can just, it's
Right.
all care, I guess.
Another question to that, because I was thinking exactly that, Barb, is the care mandatory, no control. Care plus, care on demand, fully our control.
Correct.
Okay.
But as far as the ridership itself, going back, I have been using the FY19 number. We're about 50,000 together riders more than we were in 2019. So it's greater, which is a large portion of 370,000 roughly. But the cost are more, even though it's not that many more trips relatively. What was that number? Do you remember as far as what it was before? In my notes, but I can't see it. I think it was the cost. It's at $74 now as far as the cost per trip versus it was in the.
45?
It might have been somewhere there. It was almost.
Seven.
Almost seven, yeah. All right, microtransit, kind of a similar conversation. So microtransit, we started about a year and a half ago, depending on what zone. 2 years ago, November-ish, October-ish would be the Azalea zone, which was our first kind of pilot of our pilot. They are also zero fare. We had said with any new service that zero fare is just like the Pulse at a week of zero fares, as well as our network redesign to get people to learn to use it. As we move into, it's supposed to be a 3-year pilot, so as the various jurisdictions that are not route replacements. So we did do route replacements, all the Henrico zones are route replacements. They had 2 routes, 56, which will go away in October, and the Route 93. Those are basically switch over in terms of service hour cost. But then the others that are the last mile or first mile are new rural services, were completely new to GRTC. Typically, the range for this kind of premium service for an individual rider would be about $2 to $3. So I want to put that out there as we kind of were, but here are the costs overall. This is the FY25 cost for, so you see pallets in about $250, Ashland about $950, Azalea at $800, Clipperdale at $550, and Sanson about $600. And this just shows the cost per trip. Scudder will go into how that maps in terms of productivity. But again, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to show as far as routes or zones exist for different purposes. So you have your Azalea, which is pretty much replacing a fixed route service that is in a more dense area. So you'll see the cost being a lot less. Ashland, also a very dense area relatively. And then you have Sanderson, Cloverdale, and then Powhatan that are coming in quite a bit higher. So again, with this one, we have questions at the beginning, but as far as it being a premium service, I'm going to go ahead and categorize it as that for consideration, as well as we end these pilots, and then knowing that the zones and service in rural jurisdictions did not exist prior to CBTA, and therefore the legislation from CBTA was not applicable to them because it says as service exists in that year of 2020, how that wants to be handled as far as requesting funds from them. If we want to apply the legislation as it existed on the new service to the new jurisdictions that are coming on. And I will get into this later, but there are a lot more jurisdictions who have requested more service, whether it's an express route, whether it's a micro transit zone, whether it's expansion of fixed route, beyond the original kind of 3 jurisdictions that existed before. But as Cheryl said in the beginning, the services are doing well. We're doing a lot to continue to push service, educate to the areas that just didn't have service before. So it's new for them. So outreach being really key, trying to get out there, as well as they're just Whole Street's pretty dense, but Powhatan's not going to have the same density ever as the rest. We're going to work on it.
It would be interesting to see for microtransit zones that have replaced local bus, kind of the ridership and the cost and all these different iterations for the local compared to the microtransit.
How it was used as a fixed route versus how it's used. Okay.
Yeah.
And then let's go to summarize all of the modes together.
So this is the high-level summary of current service levels, productivity, cost per boarding, and so on for each of the three major modes. Fixed route, including local express and BRT altogether. About 76% of the service hours are running on the street, fixed route. About 84% of your costs, to 97% of your ridership is on this fixed route services. Microtransit, it's about 3% of your service hours. That's 23, about 24,000, about 4% of your costs. The cost per service hour is very similar between fixed route and microtransit because you're directly operating it, so you're using the same labor pool. So at the end of the day, the cost is very similar at the bottom line here in service hour terms. And it's about 1% of your ridership. And so therefore, there's an enormous difference, obviously, in the cost per boarding and a significant difference in the productivity. Getting back to that discussion of, what is the purpose of these things? Microtransit is obviously there primarily as a coverage service. It is not expected to get high productivity. In fact, it is almost impossible for microtransit to ever do more than about 5 boardings per service hour. Think of it going around and picking up and dropping off 5 people in 1 hour is a lot because it's kind of a multi-ride taxi service in a way. And then paratransit is about 21% of your service hours. It's only 12% of your costs because as a contracted out service, you have relatively lower costs per service hour at about $73. And it's about 2% of your overall ridership. Cost per boarding levels here, we see about $6.30 on fixed route, about $35 for microtransit, and about $40 for paratransit. Much lower productivity on transit. Again, not paratransit, not surprising. Paratransit is even more than microtransit, very hard to get relatively high productivity levels on, given the challenges of the kinds of customers we're serving and the time it takes to serve it. So if we look at this in that sort of, I showed you that scatter plot earlier of productivity. This is actually cost per boarding, which is in effect the reverse. Here, the higher the number, the worse the performance if you're thinking about it in bank terms. And so if we're looking at the current fixed route microtransit services, we're, again, unsurprised to see microtransit having very high cost per boarding. So that average was about a little less than $40 per boarding, but you see it wide range here. The Azalea, because it has higher productivity, higher boardings per service hour, has closer to about a $30 per boarding cost. And the Powhatan Cloverdale services closer to $70 to $80 per boarding for those services. And then if we compare that to the fixed route services, when we look at the limited trip peak only services, they have relatively low productivity. And so they have, again, on average, higher cost per boarding, ranging from the 88, which is going to be replaced by a microtransit zone, having a little $30 per boarding, to routes like the 95, closer to $25 per boarding. And then you see the all-day fixed routes generally clustered at 25 or less, some of them far lower, the Pulse, the ones in the sub $5 per boarding range. It can be a little easier to look at this in the reverse metric of looking at productivity by service. And again, looking at it relative to frequency. So we're boardings per service hour. Top performer, the Pulse, if we're looking at all routes individually, about 35 boardings for every service hour you're running on the street. Among the other high frequency services, that standalone high frequency services, meaning the route alone is fully high frequency, only the 5 and the 19 Most of the other high frequency services are combinations of multiple branching routes, which I'll come back to in a second. The 5, it's about 20 boardings per service hour. The 19, it's about 15 boardings per service hour. And then in the 30-minute category, you have a range from about the low end, the 14 and the 20, get a little more than 10 boardings per service hour. And the 1, the 1C, the 3A get close to 5. In the 45-minute group here, in the hourly group, generally have lower productivities. Again, these are routes generally serving lower density, in particular, these in the west end of Richmond and Marenco, on Patterson, on Grove, generally lower density, activity levels. And in the 60-minute group, the 87 to 86, and the 2A is the top performer in the hourly group at almost 18 boardings per hour. I would like to highlight a slightly different way of looking at this, which is a number of those core frequent services in the region are a combination of branch routes that branch into lower frequency services. So the Midlothian, the Hull Street corridor in the city of Richmond, in particular, the combination of the 1A, 1B, 1C that branch out into lower frequency services that extend further out. If you look at just that 15-minute core section from downtown to Southside Plaza, that's actually the top performing segment from a productivity standpoint in the region. It's got 15-minute service in a pretty high density corridor, also relatively high need corridor. So you get a lot of riders. You get almost 50 boardings per service hour in that section. And then what I call the 1S on this chart is basically the Chamberlain service that's every 15 minutes from downtown Richmond up to Wilmer, where from that point on that route is every 30 minutes onward to Virginia Center Commons. That also is an extremely high performing route. That segment alone gets, again, close to 50 boardings per service hour. So I think both of these results scream out at you that the North Stafford BRT corridor, which would cover this segment, is a very high value long-term investment, given you have such high ridership, high productivity out of these two corridors. I would also note the 7A, 7B, which you recently, with grant funding, increased the frequency of. That core segment that now runs every 15 minutes also has really high productivity. It almost reaches the level at about 30 boardings per service hour. The other two routes, the 3ABC, 2ABC, that reach every 15 minute service don't perform quite as well. They are about 15 boardings per service hour, but still relatively good in their individual segments, in their lower frequency segments, perform reasonably well. And then the 4AB is a short segment that runs every 30 minutes in Church Hill, performs fairly well at the high end of the 30-minute segment. So I'll just end at this point when we're our kind of summary of service productivity performance. I can bring this map back up if anyone has particular questions about individual routes, individual corridors that we could explore it. But I think this is the kind of moment we want to pause and see if there's conversation or discussion around some of these potential policy questions, choices that we've started to raise around Care Plus service, around this board's sense of its investments in ridership-oriented versus coverage-oriented service and so forth. So I think we wanted to pause for questions and discussion.
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments. I appreciate the walkthrough about the 18 bus, fictional, these are the choices you make when you're talking about coverage versus productivity. We at this table are amateurs except for these two right here. I'll say we're working as best we can to understand strategically what's best, but we're not the professionals. You've laid out a lot of what we choose to do is going to impact this or that. I'd like to know if you have an opinion as to how close we are to what we could or should expect for the ratio of coverage versus productivity. And if we're off base, what does that look like to you? You look at this a lot more than we do. How far off are we from being properly balanced?
Well, as the out-of-town consultant who used to live in Richmond but doesn't live in Richmond anymore, I will always tell folks that the balance between how much we focus on productivity and ridership versus coverage is a value choice that I, as a technical expert, am not really the right person to tell you you should do. because every community decides its balance a little differently. So we worked on redesigning the Richmond network, and the choice at the time and the recommendation from the city council at the time was to move from about a 60-40 split to about a 70-30 split. So they wanted to move more in a high ridership direction, which did mean there were some losses of coverage in the city. There were some places that were no longer served. Well, not a lot, but a few. And that was an intentional decision they made after working through some different potential concepts of how you might design that and making that choice intentional. We're not really in the midst of this similar kind of full-on discussion and process to weigh that. I think we're mostly at this point laying out the possibility of, do you want to start reconsidering any of that? Because it is ultimately a value choice that you as the board for this agency need to weigh and think about. So I don't know if you went into that, Adrian, but if as a professional consultant, I very much don't answer that question because I don't think it's a value choice that I don't think my choice should matter to you.
But from a metrics perspective, okay, so that if we don't know the metrics, any road will get us there, right?
Yeah.
So what would be helpful, and maybe we have it, and maybe I haven't paid attention to it, is what are reasonable metrics out there in the industry that we could expect microtransit to be, given examples of other localities? Is it $40 a ride? Is it $20? Just so that we understand sort of what we're shooting at, because without that, we're just saying, okay, we do from here, and then we might independently have different opinions as to whether we're succeeding or failing without knowing what the industry expects of microtransit, paratransit, and fixed route.
I think there's a two-part answer for thinking in particular about microtransit. I think there's the first part of the answer, which I can't tell you what the right thing to do is, but that is more related to how much you all as a board and as a region feel you should be investing in coverage. And if you want to invest more in coverage, then you probably would do more microtransit in more places to, serve just more people, more destinations in general. At the same time, you should still be looking at things like your microtransit zone productivity and thinking about adjusting your zones, or potentially even if you find zones that you put out and are only getting 1.5 boardings per service hour, that is a very, very low return, even for a microtransit zone. 3, 4, 5 boardings per service hour is a metric you would expect.
And that's what I'm getting at is, what should we expect?
Yeah.
So that we can determine whether we're on or off, or on right trend, wrong trend.
Yeah. So, the range of purely productivity terms for microtransit is pretty low. Going to generally top out at 5 boardings per hour per service hour. But if you're only doing 1, that's a very low bang for your buck. You're covering that territory, but you're spending money and you're not getting much ultimate usefulness in terms of people's usage. And so you might think about, well, should we move our resources to a different part of the region where we could maybe get 3 boardings per hour, 4 boardings per hour in a different part of the region? That would, purely in kind of the space of microtransit, that's where I would be thinking about it. And then if you're talking about, fixed route performance, the productivity chart here gives us a few things to think about. At 88, you're already looking at changing it to a microtransit zone because it's been such a low productivity performance. You can see you have some other fairly low performing ones that are at that line of about 5 or 6 boardings per service hour on the fixed route side, which is at the point at which, depending on the particular area of the region you're serving, the size that you might have to replace with, those start getting into the range of, you might actually save money by doing microtransit. Now, I say that, but some of those routes may not lend themselves in terms of the particular built formed area to actually work well as microtransits and replacements. The 88 area is a little bit better in terms of kind of how hard it is to serve for fixed route. The microtransit works well where fixed routes just don't work well. And we have lots of cul-de-sacs, we have lots of, challenging places to walk. That's the better territory for microtransit, because fixed route will never be able to help get you in a reasonable time or reasonable cost.
And we do have standards set. It's not gonna be one size fits all, even in terms of like cost. There's a range, and microtransit still is new in general for a lot of transit agencies, which will tip the best of the service, but there's like a range of $15 to $45. So it really depends, like I said earlier, like what is the zone's purpose? We do have standards for, again, the standards are different by zone. Powhatan would never compare to an Azalea. But I will say Powhatan, in terms of the standards, is not hitting it yet, even amongst its own standard. But we can share the fixed route, the microtransit. I don't know if we have, I guess we have paratransit as well, but we can share those with you so you can kind of do a comparison. And as far as what the breakdown, I'm not asking you, I think that we would evaluate, and if we see a need for like frequency changes, looking at, as I said, as we plan for north-south or the western extension to Parham, looking at how densities have changed and if there's a need for more frequent or additional coverage service, which I think a lot of the changes in the rules, counties are looking at, we'll come to you guys with that as a recommendation. So this is more background knowledge to understand how we are today, and then as we look at potential needs for maybe frequency and changes, that would be with a cost, which could be a shift from coverage to frequency. That helps.
I don't want to jump ahead, Reverend Nelson, but we have an opportunity for a quorum for just a few minutes. And I know a couple things on the consent agenda we really need to try to get through today if we can. So we can jump to the consent agenda real quick. Try to get that passed so we can take advantage of the quorum. And then I guess since we have a quorum, we can. Reverend Nelson has already announced that Ms. Robinson had requested to participate virtually. So just we need to make sure that we allow her into. We have a quorum, and you want to
So move.
have a vote on.
Just need a second.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Any opposed?
So she's in now too, so that's good.
All right.
So
So we
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you, sir, for leading us. I don't know exactly what we are, so.
We're gonna do consent agenda.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for coming over. So if we get a quorum, I don't know how long you will stay, but let's try to get as much voting in as possible. And so we also recognize Mr. Donald, right?
That's it.
Donald, new CAO for the city of Richmond, who I think will be taking your spot on this board officially starting next month. So thank you for being here with us. All right, consent agenda. Anybody have any questions? Dr. Frank, Dexter, Antoinette, Haynes, all the items are here. We can call them up if need be. If not, can we get a motion?
Second.
All right, moving second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All
We
right.
need to do the action.
Minutes, we need to action items, we forgot the approval of the minutes. And we do have a note of one change for Mr. Rashid to address the organization that he's with.
Okay, so he needs to speak, he wants to speak?
No, he did.
He already spoke. He
Oh,
just
okay.
wants to have the motion to approve the minutes with the correction to
Okay,
his who he represents.
Yes.
you want to go ahead and do that now?
Yes,
or
please.
what? But you guys were already moving forward with the board retreat information.
Yeah,
Right,
we
yeah,
were doing
right.
that because we didn't have a quorum, so.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, well, let's go ahead and do that,
then
Mr.
we-
Hernandez and Ms. Torres. If you don't mind.
Yes.
And then I need to slip in at some point, guys, start thinking about it. We need to form a not personnel,
committee for, what's the name of it? Officer Selection Committee. For next month.
Yes.
My term is, chair ends next month, so we need to meet to, come up with a new chair, vice chair. Is that it? Just chair, vice chair,
And treasurer.
and treasurer. We have a treasurer?
Yes, secretary treasurer. Yes.
Who is that now?
Ms. Robinson.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
One was fair, the members of the board. The consent agenda item that I'll be presenting is regarding our air compressor maintenance agreement.
Oh, no, not consent. We need your action.
I'm sorry. This is action. Is the action. So here at a facility, we utilize air compressors for our fleet maintenance and facilities operations. These compressors are essential for powering a lot of tools and maintaining the proper functions in our facility. And so we need to have a maintenance agreement for the air compressors. And so our current agreement is expiring. And so we are looking to go into a service contract for preventative maintenance on their air compressors with the OEM, which is called Ingersoll Rand. The closed package is highlighted in your board packet. It's a 3-year contract with 2 1-year renewals, and we'll be using operating funds for this.
All right, questions for Mr. Hernandez? Hearing none, need a motion.
So move. Second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Did we introduce our new, I'm sure we did already, right? New attorney? Okay, now what's your name?
Neil Gibson.
Yeah. All right. All right, Ms. Torres.
Chair, board again. This is for support for our ERP implementation. We are in the process of working through selection through an RFP for implementer, and then the company's activity has been supporting us as we go through the process and developing our scope and as we select an implementer. And we have a change order for an initial amount of $10,800, above our 10%. So we want to move this to move forward. The recommendation to a total amount not to exceed $155,989.80.
What's the ERP?
Enterprise Resource Planning Oracle system that we'll be putting in.
You said not to exceed what, 160,000? Is that what it sounds like?
155,000. Right now it's at about 145.
We need $10 more thousand is what you said, 10. All right, questions, any more questions for Ms. Torres? I need a motion. Just one. So move. All right.
Second.
Moving in second, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. All right, back to the board retreat.
Thank you. You can stay if you, but you accomplished the goal.
We need to vote on the committee.
Oh,
You can appoint that. You can
yeah,
appoint that.
Awesome.
All right, Sharon. Where were you? Were you close? Were you close to the some side?
Oh, I was at work.
Oh, okay.
I assume that Mr.
Yeah.
We just hadn't made it official yet and we had to have a quorum in person. We're gonna fix that.
All right, we got it. So you passing the baton now.
Thank
All right, where are we here?
We are major project.
Who?
But they're pulling that up, I guess. So we're moved on to FY 26 to FY 31. And with this, we're gonna go into all the revenue sources first, and get a little more detail. So with the budget, there was a lot of questions as far as what the restrictions around the revenue sources, how they were brought in, how they were strategically utilizing. So we'll talk through them, as well as give projections through 2031 of the revenues, and then we'll switch over to the expenses to be projected last year.
So question real quick. Sorry, I missed the first hour and 45 minutes. Who is presenting? What is this? I don't know if I've met you before.
My name is Scudder Wag.
I have met you, Scudder? Okay.
I think we met before. It's been a while. I'm with Jarrett Walker and Associates. We're a consulting firm.
Oh, consulting firm, okay. Okay,
And so we've been helping Adrian and the team with analysis of service and updating some of these
I
projections.
thought you were a new.
Oh, employee.
Not a new employee, no.
We'd love to have him.
I think you.
Yes.
All right, thank you, sir.
No, but I'm glad to be here. So one of the things I hope you saw in the last round of slides, talking about the cost increases in the last few years, is there has been sort of a significant general inflationary cost increase. And we're projecting that to continue forward, probably in the 5% range in the next 5 years. In addition, there are some planned significant service expansions, the expansions with the North-South BRT, the Western BRT extension, and some improvements to some local routes. And a big challenge then is how do you keep funding that with a background cost increases happening in general, plus some significant service expansions. So if we look at the revenue buckets in your overall funding puzzle, there's 4 major funding buckets that GRTC relies on. There's the federal budget, which includes primarily 5307 program funds, which is just the section of federal law that it's named after. Every urbanized area gets 5307 funding. You can use that for capital and operating. There's a whole lot of rules that define where and how you can spend that money, where they really emphasize spending it on capital. Because for capital funding, you generally only need a 20% local or state match. For operating funding, if you want to spend on daily operations, you generally have to split the cost 50-50. There's also a whole range of discretionary programs you can apply for a range of things mostly on the capital side. At the state level, you have formula funding, meaning funding that basically comes by formula every year. And I'll highlight 5307 and 5339. Both of those at federal level are also formula, so they're generally highly reliable. You have the merit program at the state level. Merit program has operating and capital support. So there's a formula every year. Every jurisdiction, every transit agency in the state gets a certain operating contribution. And then there's also capital element that's mostly formula based. There's then a range of programs that are discretionary that you can apply for to fund individual elements, both of capital and operating. Demo grants for starting up new service, trip grants, which is one of the things you've used for zero fare, and a couple other programs that you've made great use of in the past. The main downside of discretionary programs at the state level is they tend to be 3 to 5 years, and then you no longer get that money. As opposed to the formula money, which is a pretty consistent annual stream. It varies from year to year, but it's highly reliable. At the regional level, you get the 15% CVTA set aside. That's formula, you're getting that. And then at the local level, you have the formula monies effectively you get from local jurisdictions as required by the CVTA legislation. And then you have some discretionary. Petersburg pays you about $200,000 a year to help pay for the 95X. And of course, there is always discretionary options for anyone to pay for service or pay for something in support operations or capital. So if we look at these buckets and look at this in terms of what are each of these buckets contributing to your overall revenues in this fiscal year. About 19% of your operating budget this year is federal, mostly 5307 grant money that you're using on the operating side. 19% of the budget, about $18 million. The challenge going forward, some of that is the special COVID money that had very few restrictions that is gone after this year. And 5307 money, you can use it on operating, you can use it on capital, and your capital needs in the future are growing, which means you're going to need to flex more of that to the capital side than the operating side. So you're relying a sizable bit on money that's probably going to go away on the federal side in the next years because you likely need to spend it in other areas. State side is about 27% of your revenues, $25.8 million, but about 7% of that is in short-term grants. And I mean 7% in total. So 20% is the formula, about 7% is short-term grants that are going to be expiring in the next few years. Regional, you're spending about 28.4 million of the CBTA distribution this year. That's about 30% of revenues.
But on the state, you're saying the 7% is going to go away.
7% of that money is going to disappear in the next few years. 7% of your total budget revenues. Yes. Because it's expiring grants. And local is 16.5 million, about 17% of your revenues. And that, based on the CBTA legislation, only grows at CPI rate, which has in the last few years been a couple of points below your overall cost inflation. CPI has been running closer to 3%. Your cost inflation has been running closer to 5%. So that's a challenge. Thinking a little bit more about the ongoing versus directly generated versus one-time limited grants. So kind of pulling together all of those basically formula type things, the things that you can rely on because they're basic, they're federal law, until something changes, 5307 distributions are pretty reliable, et cetera. About 84% of your revenue is in that things you can consistently rely on. About 2% is indirectly generated, advertising, some charter operations here and there, a few things, directly generated funds. In that one-time and limited grant bucket, which means the state unlimited grants that are going to run out, which is about 7%, there's another 3% that is in some kind of other time-limited grant. For example, VCU's contributions are going to expire. That's about 10% of total revenues. And then this year, you used about $4 million in prior year earned interest, which was about 4% of your total revenues. And obviously, there's no guarantees of what your earned interests are going to be in the future. And as we'll talk about, that's relying on having a pretty sizable reserve in the bank right now. And that may not always be the case in the future. So, and if you look at these two things, the least reliable things on the far right now are about 14% of your revenues for this fiscal year. That's a significant ongoing future challenge going forward.
Question, does this break out specifically between operating and capital? Or this is
all about operating. Yeah. We'll talk, we have a little bit about capital. The big picture on capital is that you have a lot of bus placements coming in the next 5 years. And so you're going to need to use a sizable portion of those 5307 and 5339 distributions to fund those things. The other side of the capital equation is the North-South BRT, Western BRT extensions, some of the other big capital things that you want to do, like Downtown Transit Center, the Northside Transit Center, which is kind of on the long term. Those are not realistically fundable through your 5307. They're really huge projects. The only way you can realistically afford those is to go for federal or state discretionary programs, which means you're going to compete with lots of other potential projects across the country or across the state.
Just as a historical look back and understanding the magnitude, do you have generally a percentage when it wasn't free fare, what percentage of revenue came in from fares? Just for
I don't know if I've got a percent off the top of my head. I think, Adrian, you were saying was about 12% in the past.
12.
Yeah. 10 to 12% in that range. So this is a relatively detailed breakdown of all of those numbers. The far left is the 2026, and then we project forward to 2031. What based on conversations with Adrian, with Dawn, with the team here, and what you're likely to get. Now, let's highlight a couple of significant assumptions in this chart. One is you see this 5307 PM flex. So two things about 5307 monies. It's really easy to use 5307 money for ADA. You can use a certain amount of it for ADA with fairly few restrictions. So we're projecting that you're just going to continue to do that, and that will grow at about the rate of inflation. PM flex, or preventative maintenance flex, is the money that you can spend on basically on operations on the maintenance side that you're allowed to do. There's a sizable chunk going in 2026, but we're projecting that to come down significantly for two major reasons. One is it is very challenging, apparently, to get your parts from Gillick certified as biometric. Therefore, when they're not certifiable as biometric, you can't use federal dollars. The second factor is you need that more of that 5307 distribution to go into bus replacement purchases, because there's substantial bus replacement purchases expected in the next 5 years. So that comes down. A couple of things I'll highlight in terms of things that disappear. There's some federal grants for IT improvements for this year that goes away. The ARPA funding that you've used the last of this year, 1.7 million, that's no longer there in the future. You have some special VDOT operating grants that's supporting the improved frequency on Route 7. That's also going towards the 19 and some other services. That will go down somewhat and then disappear. So by 2029, that 2 million or so a year is gone in revenues. There is the TRIP grant from the state that's running basically through Chesterfield into your budget of about $2 million a year. That disappears by 2029. That's another $2 million or so. And there's a range of other special trip and demo grants supporting microtransit services and some other services. That's 3 million, 3.7 this year, 1.6, and it steps down, and then it's completely gone by 2029.
So tell me about the local contributions from the cities and counties.
So these numbers are from your approved budget, and then these numbers are simply inflated forward based on our best estimate of what CPI will be in the future. Because
no, I think that's important, partially because for our city council, who is looking at a potential reduction in the tax rate for the already passed budget, reducing it might mean that we have to come back to the table and discuss, what funds are available. I mean, you're a council member. I'm hoping Ms. Robertson is listening as well, because those funds have to come from somewhere. So we would not, of course, we're advocating for the 120, but with the 116, this is one of those things that might be on the table.
So those are the items over here. So
Okay.
those are all from
So that's not from the general, that's not the general fund.
It is from your non-departmental general fund. However, CVTA legislation in 2020, you guys previously were giving somewhere around 16 million.
It increased it.
Let you guys cut it in half.
Yeah, well, but from what they wanted to do, I'm familiar with this now. So those numbers are codified, but it still kind of proves my point, is that out of the pie, those numbers are already out. So if they're not able to be reduced, then it makes your pie, that comes off the table first. Yeah.
These are the basically what we project to be the minimum required distributions based on the CVTA legislation. Just a couple of other notes. There's 4.1 million prior year surpluses and interest in this year. Based on John's projections, we've reduced that somewhat because of just uncertainty about what the reserve interest would produce. 200,000. So
reduced, not somewhat. I don't know if I would use the word somewhat. When I said I reduced it from 4.1 to 750,000.
Reduced it. Yes.
So somewhat is the right way. And then that's about 5 or 6 million in grants that are sunsetting, right?
Yes.
And this chart of projections assumes that we're not going to apply or get any more grants. So we can't assume that. We'll assume that we'll apply and hopefully there'll be future grants. So the gloom picture is not all gloom. It's $3 million, $2.7 million in interest reduction, $4 to $5 million in grant sunsetting that I can add, maybe more, 5, 6, 7, it's $7 to $8 million in grants sunsetting, that we hope that grants would be replaced in 29, 30, 31 with whatever grants would then become available.
So the challenge you face is generally most of the grants that you're using are grants that are only, you can only receive when you're doing a new service. So the grant that's supporting the 1A in Chesterfield, the grant that's supporting the 7A,
Yeah.
the frequency improvements,
So to your point,
you rarely can apply to get funding again for the same service.
so to Terrell's point about separating operations and capital, it's important to note, as you said, that if those expansion routes don't aren't fulfilled because capital dollars aren't there, then those grants aren't as available for new service as possible.
So this is not to make anything about expenses or expansion, this is strictly the revenue. But the revenue, we would have, for example, the 7s and the 19, that was a VDOT grant, and there might be an opportunity to apply for other state grants, because that was a new service. You can't, like, for example, the demo grant was the 1A, then we were able to apply. So we will continue, but for purposes of this, we did not assume.
You can't assume. I just want to make sure that the board recognizes the fact that it's not as dark.
And like the new services, which are not on here, as far as expensive, we will, like the north-south, the western, we will apply for grants for operating, and hopefully we get somewhat in 5 years.
I got an additional question on that. So the process is, so these will fall off over time, new service. The expectation is that you would then be able to absorb those costs as your normal operating expenses for those lines.
And the challenge is, where does the revenue come from to replace that?
Got it.
So hidden in here, which I'll go in a little more detail in, are some assumptions about trying to backfill that you all may or may not want us to make. So the bottom line numbers here, total baseline, you'll see actually 2027 is a little lower, and there's 7.2 million we're assuming that you use from your 22 million of reserves to help fill the gap in 2027. When I get to the cost side, you'll see 2027, even though there's not significant expansion, costs are going up. We expect 2027 to be about 5% more expensive than 2026. So there's an assumption here about using $7.2 million of your previous year surplus reserve, which is about 22 million today, to help backfill. And similarly, 2028 and 2029. The other thing you'll see is that this CBTA number is growing significantly, and then it drops off in 2031. That's in this 5-year projection. If the revenues are going to add up close to the cost, the only way to do so are without substantial additional revenues from grants or substantial additional revenues from some other source, is to use the reserves.
Again, why CVTA money would drop by, what I missed there, $23 million?
Because this is funding to operation, but it's using not just the previous year's distribution, it's using prior year reserves.
So for example, like for this year, 35 million would be the amount we're receiving, and we're spending 28.4 on maintenance service. As the maintenance of service inflates, then the total amount will eventually be used each year.
So you're saying by 29, you expect to be pulling in whatever the 30, 35 million, but spending 60 in order to maintain operations costs. So that's the cut costs.
Yeah.
And service.
Right.
So
sensible.
So I've kind of highlighted some of this already in the previous discussion.
Might be good to see that broken down.
He's got it. Sure.
Yep.
Okay.
So I've talked a little bit about formula discretionary, but just to remind, the federal formulas for those 5307 and 2339, those formulas are set by the 5-year federal legislation. State formulas are set by the TISDAC process. They're pretty predictable. Discretionary programs can obviously much less predictable, much less certain. On the federal revenue side, I'll just highlight on the 5307, this is some of the detail about what's happening. This is each year's expected distribution from the previous fiscal year. So this is 2026. You had 14.8 from the prior fiscal year, added to 43 million previously unallocated dollars in your federal distributions. So that had you up to a total of 58 million unallocated. This year, you put about 13 million into the operating budget in that PM Flex and ADA Flex categories. And you allocated about 12 million to the capital program, leaving about 32 million unallocated. So if we basically carry this math through each year, you see this remaining unallocated slowly going down as we put more significant investments over time in the capital budget, particularly in big years of capital investments in 29 and 30 with bus replacements. And so you end at 2031 with only about 4 million left in that unallocated 5307 bucket. So, and we're trying to maximize as best we can the balance across that 5-year period, how we're spending down that 5307 balance, and similar distribution along the 5330 balance.
Can you revise this chart to show negatives and totals? Right, I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like you've got adding, 14.8, 43.2, and then you start subtracting
Okay.
for a balance. It would
Yeah.
make it a lot easier for us to see
Okay.
that's spelled out.
Sure. So this is that CVTA math. And this is the total CVTA, the 50% regional. This is your 15%. This is your unallocated reserve from previous years. And how much is going to your operating and how much is going to capital and or special studies. And so how much you spend in total, and then how much is being either added to your reserve or subtracted from your reserve each year. Sorry, that did not get formatted really well. And so the cumulative reserve at the end of each year, and you see basically starting in 27, in order to deal with the increases in costs, we start pulling some out of reserve each year until you get to 2030. And by the end of that year, you've effectively exhausted all of that $62 million CVTA reserve. And 2031 is when you start to see the significant deficit relative to cost. This is just a quick inventory of all of those special state grants, the microtransit grants, the Ashland and Powhatan ones, showing kind of when do they expire. The longest one you've got, they mostly go for generally 3 years. So the Route 7 goes for 3 years until 2028. There is one you've applied for. I don't think it's been granted yet. It's bottom here.
Those are all awarded.
Oh, they're all awarded. Okay. And this is for the route and extension to Virginia, right? Correct. So that one actually starts at 28.
What'd you say the free fare cost was for 28 and 29? Did you say that already?
We're keeping it static at 6.8, what the lost revenue is. For this particular study, I want to go over. So again, to Mr. Schmidt's point, we will continue to apply for funds. My understanding is that the safety officers, for example, that is one you can reapply for. So we would do that as well. And then some of the other ones that we can, because for example, I'm going to use the Chesterfield again, the 1A, like that we applied for, you guys applied for 3 years, but that actually has the ability to go to 5. So it's a step down, but for any revenue, it's good revenue. So we'd apply for the additional 2 years. DRPT did say that. So any of those that are on here as TRIP as 3 years can be 5 years. So we would make that adjustment. However, we do want to just go over, we talked about this last retreat, but as these do, the assumption, which I don't remember, but someone did note that right now we are under the assumption that this just becomes part of our maintenance of service. As it moves forward, just be part of our general revenue hours. And if we get to a point where we will get at the end and just talk about, in general, about expanded revenue considerations that we had talked about before. But that is the assumption, unless unless the board has a different perspective, we highlighted before related to the microtransit, the rules, for example, if there's something different we should do with them, knowing they were not around when the legislation was in place, having a conversation about them bringing in maybe some of the 50%, as well as any other math to bring in additional revenue specific to this. Any thoughts on that, or direction of continuing is absorbing it just as part of our general revenue hours?
So like the microtransit zones, you're saying that the cost associated with running even the new stuff, that's an expansion and not a replacement of local, would just roll into without a local contribution.
That's the current display as we get towards expenses, yeah. So even though compared, to again, we're using the 19, but the 2020 FY 20 FY 20, where it was at that point in time, dollars were associated with the service that was on the street. Yes, service has expanded. Are the revenue coming in from those who are at table staying the same, and the rest is covered basically through CBTA? That's the model moving forward.
Yeah, but you just showed CVTA.
Yep.
We'll run out.
Right.
Right, so I don't quite understand how that will work.
You have other thoughts as far, I mean, we talked before about the jurisdictions, if we're changing it from a category of basically grandfather in service at that point in time versus expansion, then expansion could be something that's considered a new revenue source has to come in. Does the 50% have to always match the 50% of the service? Or is it, that's just an idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't understand how you can propose to roll new service into your budget when you're saying you don't have the money to pay for it. So what,
Well,
like,
the only two
what's-
choices are you gotta stop the service or the jurisdiction's gonna have to pay for the, whatever was expanded in their jurisdiction. I mean, there's really only two choices.
That's not.
I know, but
Just
the
stop expansion.
proposal,
That's not.
If you have 1A,
Don't add.
what I'm getting at though is if you have the 1A going into Chesterfield on 60 and the grant paying for it goes away, that there isn't any money to pay for that in the budget. How do you keep it in the budget unless it gets?
right, which is why I don't understand the proposal. Like, how can you just say that you're gonna roll the stuff into your,
Right, at some point we can't afford it, and it's not a doomsday scenario, because we'll try and continue to expand and bring in new revenues. However, that would be an option for the jurisdictions to pay for it. Mr. Schmidt's recommending never do the service if you know at some point the grant.
So you can have
See, that is probably a more, until you have a permanent way to fund it.
Yeah, I mean, Barbara's right. You're gonna talk about expanding or go, great, have the funding, then you can apply for those grants. But you can't apply for those grants for new service and you don't have, in my opinion, if you don't have the money to pay for it.
Afterwards, after the grant runs out.
Yeah, continuing, yeah, because then you're just getting yourself in a hole.
We're just digging a deeper hole
Yeah,
for future.
Cost coming down before.
I'm not sure I disagree with that, but I do think, and maybe it's the caveat of knowing that if these are 3-year grants, so if we want an expansion of service in the city of Richmond, and we would need to be looking at these, I'm coming in on
We
the
can
back end.
cost on the.
But that's right, we
That's right. Yeah.
need to be making a conscious decision that the expansion of said service is valuable enough to us that at some point we plan to take on those additional costs. But also be very interested in how we plan to increase our revenues. I'm, looking at some of the numbers here and looking at whether it be city contributions or, these general budgets that we have. Are there other opportunities to expand our revenues, whether it be how we accept? I was looking at Louisville, for example. They went to some form of card that they didn't have before. They were on tokens or whatnot. Saved them a ton of money, but it also made it to where it was easier on riders and they were able to, utilize those funds. Utilize that product more. But what they also found is, for me, I'm using a card I loaded at $10, which is the minimum. I only ride 4 times a month. I lose that card with $6 left on it. I've got to go get another one. And so, they also had additional purchases based on that. I'm curious at how are we looking at revenues and process improvements so that we don't necessarily have to do it fully on the backs of our contributors, for which Richmond is one that I represent.
So the example you just gave is fares. Yes, that could be a consideration. That's what if we're using the dollars at a point in time, roughly $7 million that would go towards running the service. Now, if you, I don't know specific causation, but if you implement fares, most likely a lot of people who are benefiting from the zero fare and using it more like transit freedom.
Well, but I
would have
don't, I don't want you to just jump to fares, because I think fare-free model, I don't want to speak on behalf of the mayor and council, because we haven't talked about this specifically. I'm just using that as an example of one way that they increase. That's Louisville. You can look at city of Atlanta, where I just came from, and we had some fare-free pilots for over a year and found additional revenues in other places. So I'm not asking you to conform to what I'm doing. I'm asking what is GRTC doing to look at additional revenues or revenue sources? Where are we at in that process?
Yeah. We have a bunch. So we, you weren't here, but in the spring, Scudder looked at a bunch of different tax opportunities as well as the CBTA being an opportunity as well. So those are listed at the end. So we'll go through those also.
Okay.
But I do want to, I mean,
They have been working on advertising and then other partnerships like VCU's partnerships falling out, but trying to find other businesses that might come in. But honestly, they had a little bit more success lately, but it's not been a $7 million success.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll tell you, when looking at it though, if it's not a $7 million success and we can somehow figure out a $3 million success, it still lowers the burden on the various municipalities, which is probably what I'm focused on the most.
so I do want to note that we have expanded, but it really hasn't been significant compared to the cost of the service.
Mhm.
So even if expansion had not been done, inflation on its own, especially with a 30% increase in just operator wages related to our service, would have put us in the same situation. So whether it's the service expansion and not doing it, we still would be needing additional revenue to maintain what we have. And if you look at our service hours compared to what they were before, honestly, the largest increase was in 2019. And that was because Henrico County, again, I told you, added the weekend and the night service. I think almost like a double of the budget that happened at that point in time, which is a great investment. But that's where we saw, I think, the largest service hour increase. And this hasn't even gotten to anything related to expansion for the north-south, which will be significant effort right now related to, I mean, you saw the Route 1S, as Scudder called it, like it's matching the pulse, and that's on a local route. So, I mean, you have to, I mean, thinking about the region in terms of the service is there for the people, not just because we're trying to match it a budget. So if there is a way to bring in new revenue and not put a route in because there are people on Cloverdale or Whole Street or Broad Street who need the service and are benefiting from it. I think that's the conversation and the challenge here.
Maybe, let me maybe just go through a little more of the details, and then there's some big picture questions to talk through, I think. This is just a summary of the reserve balance situation. You have $22 million in reserves from surpluses from previous years. Showed you earlier how we spend some of that down, $7 million in 27, 7.6, 2.2 and 29. That gets you down to a reserve balance of about 5 million, which John has indicated is about a minimum you really want to hold in the bank for all of the various floats that you have to do. So that would.
But the minimum is what?
About $5 million, John said, it's like kind of the very minimum you would want to ever get to in terms of, but some of the federal dollars you use are dollars you actually have to request reimbursement. So you have to spend them and then you have to reimburse. So you contact.
But you have the money to make the payment before
You got it. So you need, but you need a decent reserve in the bank at all times, obviously, just to keep the cash flow moving.
The 22 million reserve, this is what we talked about in the finance committee meeting. There's a portion of that is in the 25% finance reserve. The balance of it, around 5.7 million, is in there. It's a balance needs savings. We're actually surpluses on 23.4 and projected 25, which we will do after post audit results.
Let's pause. You got a question, Councilwoman Robertson? You got a question or comment?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. I want to raise the question as it relates to policies that the board needs to have. I don't think we want to drill down on our reserve funding to the degree that we don't have sufficient funds there to support what we need. So we brought this question up before, I think, as it relates to whether or not we have policies on one-time funding and what we would use one-time funding for that are not going to be repeated, and whether or not we put those funding in services or costs that will be a continued cost. And using one-time funding for those kinds of things tend to, put us in a position that we either, we do a temporary service for the length of time rather than a continued service. And a policy as it relates to that one-time funding, policy as it relates to our reserve and how much we want to keep in reserves. And then we've talked a lot about, what other sources of revenue we want to tap into. And, I don't know that I've heard yet a clear path forward as to what revenue sources we want to make as a policy decision for raising revenue to support the costs that we've already projected out. Thank you.
Thank you. You guys want to speak to that before we move forward? Anything to?
Well, we do have some options here at the end to think about significant revenue potential. So I've just got a quick summary on that revenues forecast. This is a projection on the revenue side, kind of by the large buckets, federal, state, regional, et cetera. Again, this forecast is built on the assumption of continuing to run what you run today and continuing to try to maintain and then expand in the things you plan to expand. You can tell us to revisit those assumptions about how much service you want to run, what you want to continue planning for. The priorities: 1, maintenance of service; the 2, BRT expansions; the operating cost projections, 500,000 more for the Western BRT extension, North-South BRT about $7 million a year. Beyond that, there are lots of requests for things that people in the region jurisdictions have asked for that would require even more money beyond, if you wanted to do that. The Paramount Orbital Service, Route 3 extension to Azalea Avenue, additional microtransit services, express routes to some of the rural jurisdictions. These are all things people have asked for, which would put more pressure on the costs and need for revenue. We have not projected these additional items at all. In terms of capital priorities, I think Adrian can speak to some of those, but they're mostly about safe and good repair.
Just gives a quick summary of the capital priorities. As Scudder had mentioned earlier, we're assuming anything that is major, like the price tags along the downtown transfer hub and North-South BRT and the Western BRT. The North-South BRT alone is about $380 million we're looking at for total cost of engineering and construction for that project. And the Western BRT, it's somewhere around $60 million. And transfer hub around $50 million. So those we're assuming all discretionary. We wouldn't even consider those as matches within our current revenue sources. So the majority up here is vehicle replacements being the main ones. And I know this green looks a lot smaller than the purple, but still, it is still 41 million, 29 million, 15, 26, and 9. But those would be covered through typically pretty reliable between state, our 5307, 5339, and then with UCBTA local match, as we've done in the future. And those are all in the revenue and expense numbers already.
Can you add the estimated cost for those to that slide?
Western and North, yeah. I both put in the same thing, but North-South BRT.
I don't know if there's a way to fleet replacement or.
Oh, all of them you want to have on. Yeah, there is a whole spreadsheet. That's what that's.
So projected costs, we have 2 projections. One is if you don't actually expand, if you don't do North-South BRT and Western BRT, just presumed background inflation on labor costs in particular, which has been relatively high at about 5.4%, would lead to total operating cost being a little over 120 million by 2030. So if you were to focus on just trying to maintain what you have out in the street today, you would be looking at about a little over $120 million in 2031 versus closer to 95 million today. By mode, most of that is local and BRT service. You see microtransit in the light purple color here, and in that top purple is the paratransit, which is still a decent chunk, about 12% of costs. If we presume some additional services, particularly those north-south and western BRT extensions, which we anticipate come online by mostly 2031, that bumps total operating costs up to about $131 million by 2031. So that's a pretty significant chunk. In particular, north-south BRT adds about $7 million to the projected operating costs. Zero fare. There's a strategy here of continuing to grow the advertising program. It's grown, but it's not grown a lot. There's the new entertainment screens, new benches and shelter opportunities. There is a $2 million CMAQ grant that you're using to help fund that. We have projected on the revenue side that you continue to get that through the 5-year period we're looking forward. But that's, of course, only about a third or a little less than a third of the projected zero fare cost. And then there's a community treatment partnership that you're going to talk about that.
Sure. So yeah, these numbers are just projections, and we will try aggressively to make them reality, but better identify kind of our advocacy program, which we're pushing aggressively and actually working with hopefully a third party for sponsorships for both our transfer station and our Pulse line as well. We have the 12 arches. And in the community partnership, currently Plan RVA has a merit grant and is working with a few consultants on doing a study for the region to hopefully identify some funders or donors related to that, as well as kind of how to make transit a little bit more relevant to our region in terms of conversation, as it's the weaves kind of together a lot of the other common conversations as far as pillars out there. Community Foundation, we've had some good conversations with them, hopefully coming up with some creative ways to kind of see the couple of years to get us going before the Plan RVA efforts tap in. And then we're currently have a fundraising going on. I meant to get some slides, actually stepped out, but we are quarterly doing a Tap into Transit Day. It's kind of a call to action with a lot of other nonprofit organizations do. The goal is through that whole community effort to bring in about $2 million annually. And then currently, as we did last year, GRTC, the policy of earned interest, our surplus is what supports the GRTC portion of funding. And we hope that that steps down as these grow up. But as of this year, it's like 4 million or so that's covering, it's 1.1, that current pot. So we are moving this forward to hopefully cover the 6.8 million moving forward.
So to put the two costs and revenues together, you see the two lines, the cost and the operating revenue, basically in alignment, but again, that is in alignment only because you're spending down those reserves over the next 3 to 4 fiscal years. And then you see once those reserves are exhausted, you end up with about a $40 million gap in fiscal year 2031. That's about 30% of the budget. So that raises the big question, again, expansion in this scenario is only about $10 million in 2031. So even if you didn't expand, you're talking about something like a $30 million gap by 2031, just maintaining current service levels. Again, assuming you are spending down those reserves and surpluses. Now, on the revenue side, we talked with the Finance Committee and others about avenues to try to get more revenue. There was discussion about a TNC tax. That is a challenging thing to estimate what you could achieve out of a TNC tax. We worked from a methodology that Northern Virginia Transportation Commission develops to try to estimate what could be achievable in this region. If you were to apply basically the standard sales tax level of 6% to TNCs in this region, dedicated that revenue to transit, it could probably produce between $1 to $1.7 million a year in revenue. Some of these others are other common avenues that other regions have used to try to fund transit, particularly Northern Virginia has applied some of these others. The vehicle registration fee, for every dollar you add to the vehicle registration fee, you could achieve about $1 million per year if you applied that to the CBTA region. The much larger increments of potential revenue is if you were to request changes to the CBTA sales and fuel tax increments and dedicate that additional to GRTC. So for every 0.1% in retail sales and use tax, currently 6% plus the 0.7 that goes to CBTA and is partially distributed to you. For every 0.1%, you can achieve between $24 and $27 million a year additional revenue. And the regional fuels tax, the regional level tax that goes to CBTA is about 7.6 cents. For every 0.1 cent, you could achieve approximately $80 million a year in revenue.
On both those combined, diesel and gas?
Diesel and gas, yes, together, approximately 8 million. Yeah, 7.6 currently for gas, 7.7 for diesel.
About that, so the CBT, the retail sales value, CBTA is at 0.7%.
Yeah, and you get 15% of that 0.7%, right?
15, GRTC gets 15% of that 0.7.
Yeah.
And you're saying if it was 0.8?
If it was 0.8 and that additional 1.1 increment all went to GRTC, you would produce about $24 to $27 million a year.
That 0.7 is in this CBTA taxable line. That has to be state.
Right now, it's already there.
State modified.
That's the General Assembly would have to change that. Yes. Yeah.
So you put that on the front of the point, not just increase in the local. I got you.
Yeah. So almost any of these would ultimately require some kind of General Assembly action to apply, depending on how you applied it. Whether you applied it just at individual locality level or at the CBTA level. But this is assuming it's a CBTA-wide application. Obviously, the vast majority of any CBTA funding comes from 3 main jurisdictions. Some other smaller ones.
We would need to get on top of, I mean, if it involves CBTA or increase with localities, we need to probably start talking about this a year in advance.
Probably.
I'm not in politics of it, so I'm not sure how it.
Well, I mean, it'll have to go through the GA, which is like January, February, so.
Yeah, which is coming soon. Yes. Driver's license fee, this is a potential fee that other jurisdictions looked at. For every dollar you add to that, it doesn't produce a lot of revenue. It's about $100,000. And vehicle sales tax, it's 4.15% today. For every 0.1%, you could get about $3 to $4 million. And then hotel tax, transit occupancy tax, current rate's about 8%. For every 1%, you can again produce about $3 to $4 million a year in revenue. So these are some of the most common sources that other transit authorities, regional transit commissions across Virginia have looked at. And this is our best estimate of what they could achieve in this region for GRTC. So, this raises some policy questions. We talked with you all last year about big picture, some policy questions. Should the CBTA dollars be used to support all services? And most of you on the board at that time said yes. Should there be a minimum reserve amount for CBTA funding? And you all felt like there should be about 3 months of expenses as a minimum, suggesting we shouldn't be spending down the CBTA reserve as aggressively as we're projecting in this current assessment. And should local jurisdictions contribute more to fill the gap? And 5 of you at that time said, yes, there should be a contribution set to some percentage of the service amount in each jurisdiction. That is another avenue. If you don't feel you can achieve some change in regional revenue options, local jurisdictions could be asked for some addition. And the top 3 capital projects, the NSBRT, the downtown transit center, and the Western Extension, were the 3 top capital priorities among those discussed last year. So these are some big picture questions, really, just to spark discussion about how to fill this gap and meet this challenge. Do you want to explore expanded revenue options to meet costs? Do you want to explore changes to Care Plus to reduce costs? Do you want to explore service reductions in the future to reduce costs? Do you want to limit or eliminate planned service expansions to limit future cost increases? I think these are some of the really big picture questions that we probably aren't going to have decisions today, but are critical for setting the path forward for what staff should be trying to do to address this challenge in the next 5 years. So, Adrienne, I think I'll maybe close it out.
Sure.
What else to say?
I mean, these are bulleted in a certain order as far as things that we have set, like the first one being CBTA. Mr. Nelson highlighting that we would want to start that now. That's something that GRTC, we sit as non-voting members of that particular organization, but being on it, understanding it, we do see that we have the rules are now wanting more transit. And I think they're seeing the benefit of it as well, especially with this micro transit, and compared to how it was in the beginning. I know you're saying don't do it, but the micro transit zones feel like we're needed for them to benefit from transit on a political level. And so I think we have seen support there. So we think that might be a good avenue, at least to try moving forward, or maybe some change within CBTA, and looking for direction if that is something that the counties, of course, would be the lead on that effort for the next General Assembly. I know Joe and Scott talked a little bit more. I know other transit agencies are also kind of going off for similar conversations for additional funds. We are nowhere compared to that. And again, as you saw, it's not doomsday, as well as, I don't know if you saw it, but the number used to be 2028. You guys remember that same thing, drawing it down, it's now at 2030. So that has shifted, but we just want to make sure we're in front of it, because these things, a lot of the options for additional revenue beyond, and even the jurisdiction ones, I think it's going to take time. So with that, we wanted to start turning the tap now to move those forward, but you need you guys to kind of be the champions for that. Some of the other ones, like the Care Plus change elimination, would like to get a kind of like a feeling or a response. Right now, it's kind of a blanket approach with the zero fare. All service is under that, whether it's Care Plus, however, our Care on Demand. So with the Care Plus, we were looking at potentially doing a model where Care Plus could become Care on Demand. And that would be a third party and would be through that sort of effort, but also it's a little more reliable in terms of service, as well as with more of an Uber style. And us not being required to operate it would be a consideration. So if you guys would be willing to just support the direction of us exploring that becoming kind of a user Care on Demand model for the greater part of the county.
And that's part of your paratransit study.
It is,
And
as it specifically, that piece may not be, but we could, it's come as something they've identified as a not creative, but a way that other agencies have, after these studies, like for example, Indigo, they had a similar model. That's what they separated. They changed it so their additional kind of premium service was no longer part of their normal one, and upgraded that out.
And when's the paratransit study going to be done?
Kevin has said next month.
Okay. So yeah, it would be nice to roll that concept into that study.
Okay.
To have at least some sort of idea
of
how that would work and cost. And
okay, yeah, we'll be bringing the full recommendation, so we'll include that as part of it. I appreciate that.
on the Second bullet, if GRTC receives 30% of CBTA funds, currently you get 15%. So in the slide we just talked about, revenue, potential revenue sources, you were not proposing that, you were just saying increase the tax rate by 0.1%. So this is a whole new, which,
It was just another option to consider.
okay. You might want to put that on the chart ahead.
Okay.
I don't know that they'll be able to consider that though, because they've bonded, future revenues. CVTA is doing, bonding against the future revenues, so I don't think they're gonna be able to change the, and jurisdictions are bonded against their future revenues from CVTA, so I don't
It
think.
would reduce, right. And
The other option may be available, but I don't think that option's available.
Another one we've heard is that the regional projects currently are only considering capital, but if the framework, which is not a state required change, was allowing operating related to transit, that is also something that would be done by the CBTA board and not have to go to the general.
so stick that on there.
Medicare Plus. We talked about these quite a bit, not doing the service at all. Not that it matters, but the current service that was eventually expanded quite later, it did go before the board at that time. So it just was a different board as far as their interpretation also of the CBTA dollars to our direction was to use them for expansion. So we've been holding them for that purpose in the reserve, that we'd eventually have enough operators to expand. However, we didn't anticipate that costs would have increased at 37%. So it kind of just didn't work out in terms of that being the sustainable piece for the expansion, unfortunately.
Adrian, I'm dumbing this down a little bit for me here, but as I go through the mental math and I think about conversion of Care Plus to premium, as I think about maxing out advertising revenues, as I think about bringing in community support in terms of sponsoring bus stops, things like that, and any general efficiency improvements we can make with operations within GRTC doesn't come close to some of the things that have been presented here that require legislative support. Is that fair?
That is absolutely.
Okay. So we need to have the right perspective where we're saying we have to do those things.
Yeah.
We have to do those. And
Correct.
it's not going to get us there. And I think it's an important first step to understanding. And so understanding what that gap still is after going for those things, I think is going to be helpful.
And the revenues only consider, is that right? The CMAC, everything else is being absorbed for GRTC. So all those additional aggressive advertising, that's not in the revenue projections you have. So that would be an additional, I don't know, 3 or 4
But
million.
it's not going to get us.
Right. Might get you to 2031 opposed to 2030. And then we didn't really, I mean, I guess, same thing going back one slide to this, just as we continue down the path, and if we go down the consideration of not expanding, this is a lot of work and a lot of money. I mean, it's what, $18 million just for engineering of the north-south BRT, and we're only at 20% or so. So we're going after grants for this. We have all the money for the western extension in terms of full engineering already. And we're applying pretty aggressively. I think we should be pretty good for the western and hopefully start construction as the Broad Street corridor does sidewalk improvements for 2028. We want to make sure that the board supports the service, even though we may not have the revenue. These are huge efforts as far as moving forward. And so I don't know if we need to do a resolution with your boards of your jurisdictions, if that's the recommendation to move forward, but just making sure that that is supported as we move forward with these 3.
Yeah, well, when you're talking about north-south BRT, you've got it in phases. And phase 1 going to Stonebridge and Spring Rock, or what district, whatever it is called, makes sense to me. And requires this discussion about how we're going to support it, the operations long-term. But the effort to continue the planning level study for phase 2 all the way out to Walmart Way seems a little premature, and I don't really know how much investment that is. It might not be that big a deal. It might be covered with the grant. So,
It was covered with the grant, however, we have decided to reallocate that money to the phase one, and we are no longer doing that study.
okay,
So we have,
That makes sense.
as the eventual phase is maybe in 3 years to do maybe NEPA, but right now we're not moving forward with that.
okay,
It's not, I mean, we just put the routes in. You can't even say that it needs BRT.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, we did do that.
okay, yep,
But yeah, so that 380 is for just north-south, and the 7 million is just for going from basically Henrico to Chesterfield. As far as making sure that's solidified in terms of what the future operating dollars are, and how that would be paid for, would you like us to take those to just your administration for letters of support? Should that be a resolution from your boards? We have the current board as well as the board in 3 years, support documented.
Be honest with you, there's no way you can confirm there's an election in between that you have support in 3 years. It's just impossible. Any board can change what any other board did.
Yep.
You can only make the best decision you can with what you got today, but you can't guarantee that another board will make that decision.
Correct. I mean, same with the appropriation, the annual budgets will change. So even if the funds are there, they may not be there next year.
about the second item, downtown transfer station, like, I think all of us agree, we really like that concept. But the details of how to construct it, like how to fund capital, just to get it up, and then how to operate, how it will pay for itself down the road. Those kind of details, we have to have those discussions, and it has to be a little more granular in order to say, yeah, we support it, or no, we don't.
Yeah. Jordan's got all figured out. Well, that's this one, as far as the capital, where's downtown transfer station, city has applied for the CBTA funds, I believe the bond for that portion of it. So as well as we are going to, if possibly, reapply for the federal grant. So the operating numbers I was trying to have for today, but it was, it's looking like the revenue that we get would offset the cost. So I think the costs were relatively like 600,000, but for operating, let me have to pull those to share with you, but it looked like there might be an offset for that. So they won't be as great.
Which one was it?
The actual operating, the main O&M for a transfer.
Yeah, when you brought it up at development committee, there were some concerns raised, and the model, how it would work.
Yeah.
If you were an owner in the building, but somebody else was running all of it and you just had a percentage of the revenue, that might be one thing, but GRTC doesn't have any business running the leasing part of owning the second floor with commerce there. Like GRTC doesn't need to be running that. If they were through grants and whatever built the building, a part owner that shared in the revenues, that might be good, but you don't want to see in day to day. She doesn't want to be answering the call why they can't flush their toilet in the second floor suite at the transfer station.
Yes, correct.
Just saying.
That's true.
Yeah, we're trying to get, besides the resale that's activated on the first floor, a lot of it would be, like, it's the way that it's designed and what public safety used to be, it's in a hole. So it would be having escalators, elevators, all the technology. I mean, it's just a lot more than we take on now. So that's kind of the cost of looking at ours. What is the O&M that we don't have today on a surface parking lot that we have to incur? And the hope is that if we did own the rest of it, that even if we had a property management company, that we would get the revenue related to the tenants to offset it. So that's the model we're trying to move forward. Now, the rest of it in terms of the buildup would be the private developer, would be kind of the odor of the rest of the condos we wouldn't have.
North South BRT question. Can you tell me if these are just safe assumptions right now, where your range is up? So design, environmental studies, that kind of stuff. That project cost for the North-South BRT in full, to Laura's point, almost 400 million, it's like $400 million. With no, and I think it's a safe assumption, there's no ongoing funding plan yet for that. And this picture that you guys shared today either further signifies that funding something like that is not yet anywhere figured out, right? Ongoing funding for that, correct?
Yeah, it's in this, that's that gap.
That's that gap.
Is
So-
the, yeah.
So are we still spending money on design, environmental, do all that, chasing something that we know we have a remarkable funding gap? And is the ask, the consideration of this board to either keep spending those dollars on environmental studies and design or pause that and stop spending because we have no plan funding it? Yeah, so
That's the question.
count me as 100% of my singular vote to stop spending money on that until we can figure out a funding plan. Because otherwise, I think,
Yeah.
quite frankly, I think we're just spending dollars on design and environmental. And that is not a close funding cap. So we have to have a much better plan before we keep spending design dollars, my opinion.
Yeah, sorry, I would really like to be able to see a whole plan of
Yeah.
that, because that definitely is a project that I would really love to see happen based on where and how it's going to support the growth of South Side. And so we need to really be thinking about that.
And stop chasing dollars now until we figure out how to fix that.
But I think you also said 10 million of that 40 million gap, 10 million of it is for the north-south or western area of the expansion. Can be tied to that. You still have a $30 million gap just because of the cost of inflation and the cost going towards operators, we've upped our game to be competitive. And so like we could stop north-south BRT western expansion and save 10 million, but we still have a $30 million deficit that we have to figure out.
Correct, that's correct. Right, because the western is 500,000, because we're basically doing a 1-for-1 replacement of the Route 19, so that's not.
$500,000 in the western is not a big deal.
And the 7 million isn't really, we're also doing a route replacement with the Route 1 with that service, so it would be a lot more money. But I want to say that we are looking at it in phases, so that's 12 miles. So we are looking at potentially doing Chamberlain to just downtown as a phase 1A, and then 1B from downtown to Southside Plaza, and then a 1C from Southside Plaza to Chesterfield. So I don't have that broken down, but that would be a lot more.
One of the benefits of doing a BRT project is it is giving you, using federal money, it's upgrading your infrastructure. And, building essential transit infrastructure, shelters and sidewalk. You do sidewalk with it?
Yeah, you could.
So you're getting the benefit of spending federal dollars to do the stuff that today you need already for.
You're saying you don't have to activate the operation of it?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
But yeah, you still have
Yeah,
to,
okay, yeah.
but you do have operation costs today on those local routes, which are high ridership and pretty high frequency already. So kind of weighing that, you know what I mean?
There's also the revenue in terms of economic development that has to be considered. I mean, look at Scott's addition in the city of Richmond and Broad Street in general. They redid all of that zoning, and I don't have it, but I do have a slide that shows with the increase in terms of property values based on like just the improvements on that corridor are for the city of Richmond, just probably biggest growth in that time, which really is to the pulse. So we are doing kind of our due diligence, working with the city of Richmond, doing a TOD study in parallel. We've identified 6 sites within the city of Richmond. So can you imagine, one of them is Southside Plaza. And then there's Broad Rock, all things that are not currently activated. There's so a total of 6 altogether, but that would also bring revenue to the city of Richmond and change just the way that it is today, kind of in partnership of the zoning effort that's currently being done within the city. So that is a benefit to more revenue to cities and the counties. That's primarily the city though. So there's a lot more to a BRT than just I mean, it's huge for the riders and the infrastructure, but also the economic development behind it. Same with the TOD downtown. I mean, that you're saying the transfer hub. I mean, downtown Richmond today has so many parcels that are being looked at for kind of a change and a catalyst. So we see this as the catalyst to hopefully bring in more developers to help them bring the rest of them along with that TOD. And there's a lot of federal dollars that go with all of that, which, I mean, at $380 million, if we hold off on $380 million in today's dollars and in 5 years, I mean, you can smart scale, like that's going to be like $600 million if it's held off also.
I think we're getting close to lunch.
Yeah.
Is it most people are getting hungry? I think maybe the biggest picture closing, I think I could put on this is, I think you all as a board staff are particularly struggling with how to forecast out what to do, because you got this big regional pot of money, you reorganize your board and your structure around the regional structure. But no one ever really set a true vision of what the transit system should be. That was, within what you could afford to do. And plus COVID and this labor inflation really hit all at the same time. A lot of other regions that have significantly expanded and gotten new regional revenue sources have gone through a process of basically saying, here's our vision of what we're going to fund and how we're going to fund it. Charlotte, Raleigh, Indianapolis, others, they did a big plan and said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get a half-cent or a full-cent sales tax of this, and here's what we're going to build with it. You all never really set that and really had the opportunity to forecast out what you could really afford to do. And so I think staff have sort of struggled with continuing to plan for things that lots of people have asked for without a real set vision of what you could afford to do. So I think that part, even if you stop funding the North South BRT study, yeah, that might take out 25% of that future gap, but you still got a big gap that if that gap never got filled, you're looking at 20-30% levels of cuts to just relative to what you're running today. So I think there's just a really big question of, do you want to initiate a conversation with your own boards, with the council, with the community, with Plan RVA of, we want to fill this gap because we want to keep running what we're running today and continue expanding, or do you want to start planning for the opposite? I think that's the biggest picture question.
It would be nice to know if we invested $10 million to keep doing North-South BRT, how much that going, not just economic development, because that kind of goes over my head, but like just the infrastructure part of it, sidewalks and bus stops. Like investing $10 million to do the BRT, it's going to mean that much less money that the city will have to find to upgrade infrastructure that is needed right now.
Right. What do you get funded through that reduces the burden from infrastructure investments?
It's sort of like, all right, I'll call it BRT if I can get some new bus stops and sidewalks. Sounds good to me.
Oh, Councilwoman Robertson has a question.
Yeah. Yeah, guys, I hear you. And I think that, some extra money for sidewalks and those kinds of things are great sources of revenue. That each one of our localities, I hope, would benefit if we are putting in additional transit. And I think that, yeah, we may see some increase in property values based on where bus rapid transit is going and maybe even other transit. But I think that unless we can talk more regional and how we want to look at regional revenue sharing for transit, I'm not sure I'm comfortable that, speaking to how much parcels of land will increase or have increased in the city of Richmond or anywhere else, without us talking about it from a regional revenue sharing process and coming to an agreement as to how we're going to do that. I'm not sure we're looking at a reliable source of revenue. Dan, I think, what we do when we talk about tourism and our process that we look at how we have created regional formulas or policies as to how the regions are going to contribute makes it something that is predictable and something that is sustainable and something that is accountable. And I think that all of these potential options may be sources to consider, but I'm not hearing what I want to hear as far as a regional process of how we would look at expanding our buy-in and our desire to have an effective regional transit system. And I think that's essential.
Any other questions or thoughts?
All right, well, let's pause right here. So I feel like projections, major projects, zero effect, did we cover all of that?
We've covered.
What about the revenue sources? We covered that too, right?
Yes, sir.
So are we done other than next steps? Okay, all right. How long is the next steps piece? Well, let's do this. Can we just grab the lunch and eat it while we listening to next steps?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that was the next step too? So you want us to just take the
Lunch to go.
You can.
all right.
But I do have one quick question.
Yes.
Will we be talking or continuing this conversation at the next board meeting relative to the BRT?
We can bring back more information, so that we can talk more details, the details that were requested, the breakdown.
Yep.
Any other questions just in general? I do have the one next business piece, but any other questions in general? All right, 3 jurisdictions, a rep from each one. I need 3 people to get together between now and meeting October the
28th.
okay, and come up with a slate of officers to serve, I think it's 2-year terms, right? So,
And that's if all of we know one change to the board will be the city of Richmond. I know Chesterfield board members are staying the same, so it's a matter of Henrico. But if anything changes, I'll send that to you so you can send it
yeah,
out.
we're good. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Nominate Mr. Hughes.
all right, Enrico.
Have Enrico as representative.
All right,
Thanks, Terrell.
2 people here.
I'm gonna go ahead and say me, because I know she about to say it.
Okay, so,
Unless she wanna do it, but I'm sure.
Barb already knows she's doing it too, so.
Barb, okay, all right, so Councilwoman Robertson, are you good with Councilwoman Jones?
Sure.
Okay,
Chesterfield nominates Barb.
all right, so Barb, Terrell, and Councilwoman Jones, and then, Mr. Dillon, can you just coordinate with them 3? And, you guys will, I guess, talk and set it up for you guys to have a conversation and come up with a new slate of officers for the next 2 years, okay? Any other business? Thank you.
No.
Our leadership team for this, all this information. We definitely are at a critical time now and in the future. We have some really important decisions to make. Looking at the future direction. So I think you guys have put it out there and we need to decide where we want to go. So, all right, colleagues, anything else?
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting adjourned.